the National Party and Tony Severin from ACT, but they should also introduce themselves.
They should. Well, that's good practice. That they thinking of the, you know, vision and hearing and everything else impaired people.
Yes.
So you just talk. You look at the camera.
Yeah.
Pretend that's people.
Let me sit over there.
Do you want to sit there?
Ah, sit here.
See, there's a room for 3 people, and that's,
Yeah.
that's Emily Henderson. She's probably up at whāngai. You can see people.
Tell me when to start.
Good. Who do we have with us?
Oh, you want? Are we?
We should have 1 second. The video just needs to come on. It's just coming on now.
Sorting
Sorry,
ourselves
it's a long
out.
time to get it all set up.
When
Right.
is that them?
Tui, if you could give me a signal when you're ready to go.
I think we've just got everyone in now, so now seems good.
Okay. Kia ora koutou, everyone. I'm Emily Henderson, so ko Emily Henderson aho, and I'm your chair for today's meeting. Thank you so much for making the time to come before us. You can take it as read that we have read your submission, your written submission. So you can either speak to it or you can read it. This time is entirely your own. But what would be great would be if just a couple of minutes before the end, you would pause to see if there's any questions in the room so that we can have a discussion if there's still time left. But you don't have to if you don't want questions. You can keep going. This is your time. So I'll briefly introduce everyone in the room. In no particular order, we have Penny Simmons, who's a National Party MP. We have Tony Severin, who's an ACT MP. We have Teresa Ngobi, who is a Labour MP, as am I. And now is your time. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Okay. My name is Oscar Stace. I am a member of People First Wellington. I am also the member of the Parliamentary Advisory Reference Group. We meet 4 times a year to advise on how to make Parliament more accessible for staff and visitors. I am wearing a sunflower lanyard, which is an international sign for hidden disability. They are now available for visitors to Parliament, and staff had training in hidden disabilities. Access means access to Parliament buildings and services. Thank you.
Yes. There's Oscar's lanyard, which will be, hopefully you'll be seeing around Parliament and in your offices soon, and you'll know what that means. I'm Hilary. I am Oscar's mother, and sometimes I help him with advocacy, including around access issues. Access means different things to different people. For Oscar and his friends, it often means access to information in a way they can understand it. It means access to participation in the city where they live, including public transport and safe walking routes. It means access to good housing, education, training, and jobs. It means access to appropriate and timely support. For our friend Martin, who is a paraplegic, it means physical access to shops and buildings. He is currently unwell and in hospital, and access to our public health system has been literally life-saving for him. There has been some criticism of this bill for setting up a process and a committee rather than dealing definitively and legislatively with access in all its complexity. However, I prefer the approach of this legislation because of what we have learned from the establishment of Whaikaha, the Ministry of Disabled People. Having good inclusive processes are vital. Whaikaha was established and continues to be developed with a careful and authentic co-governance model, a tripartite process between disabled people, Māori, and the Crown. Underpinning this process are the principles of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Aotearoa's own Enabling Good Lives principles, established by disabled people themselves, and of course, Te Tiriti principles of co-governance and partnership. Most significantly, disabled people are at the top table. In this way, Whaikaha is addressing the disabling society head on and ensuring the new ministry, Whaikaha, will be effective and enduring. My interpretation of this access bill is that it is proposing a model that can address the access needs of all New Zealanders by establishing a similar co-governance structure between disabled people, Māori, and the Crown. And there will hopefully be some members with intersectional expertise. This committee would consider the myriad and diverse access needs for all New Zealanders and prioritise and propose a regulatory framework that would work for all and not have gaps or unintended consequences. Perhaps the bill could be strengthened by specifically referring to the Whaikaha tripartite model. It also needs to have enabling good lives principles added to the legislation. The Parliamentary Advisory Reference Group, which Oscar mentioned and of which he is a member, was set up a couple of years ago because some parliamentary staff saw a gap and a need to improve access. The group includes disabled people from across the country and staff from parliamentary services and the Office of the Clerk. Recently, an access advisor was appointed. Some staff have learned New Zealand Sign Language. The availability of the lanyard is another visible victory, and I just have to, the lanyard's been a little bit of a journey for us. It's been really much promoted by the autism and neurodiversity community over the last couple of years. It's available in some airports, but this little victory for the parliamentary access, the advisory committee that Oscar is on, asked about them about a year ago, and just today we asked for one at the reception, knew about it but she didn't have one, but the first place you come in, the inquiries place, they had them and they said they just got them. We're not sure whether you have to give them back or whether you can have them for good, but it's just an important little victory. And of course it has to go with training, but it's just one little thing. Little victories can have big implications. And so with similar goodwill, the access bill could have significant and positive outcomes for disabled people and all New Zealanders. And that's weird to say at this point, but it is quite strange talking to people in a room with no people around the table, I must say.
Yes, it is really difficult, and I'm sorry about that.
Yes.
It's just the way things have panned out.
Yes.
Now we have a question from Teresa Nagobi.
You can look there.
Oh. Kia ora, korua, and thank you very much for your really awesome submission, and also for the work that you've done as well, you know, to make sure that we have that accessibility in Parliament, or the visibility for the accessibility in Parliament. So ka pai you both. Listen, I really liked the the tripartite model that you talk about. And I also see like the benefits and what that looks like. I really love how you've made sure that if you include Te Tiriti, and you talk about the UN Convention and you talk about enabling good lives, and what Whaikaha's model already looks like, well, the benefits that could be. So my question would be to you is, it sounds like you feel like this bill is a good start. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you think it's a good start. But you're asking us to maybe look at that in a broader sense. And do you think that would, do you think that that's around going back to Whaikaha and seeing how that model works, or and we will have them submitting anyway, but making sure we get a briefing from them? How do you see us getting that information to make this bill even better, I guess?
Yeah, I had another read this morning and I didn't see enabling good lives in there, so that has to be added. But I think, I've interpreted it as, because I know about how Whaikaha has been developed over the last couple of years, and I know I'm not personally involved in the tripartite process, but I know lots of people who have been, and it's a very slow, deliberate, respectful process. So when I saw this access bill, I just assumed it was doing something similar. But that message certainly hasn't got out to what you would call the disability community. So I would really like, yes, whether it could be tightened, or I'm not sure how, don't know about legislation, about drafting of it, but somehow to show that this is using a similar model to how Whaikaha was developed and is keeping on being developed. It's a very, that slow, deliberate, inclusive process that is deeply about partnership, but equal value, and that whole thing of that, you can have some disabled people and say that's inclusion. Actually, this is disabled people chosen by their peers, people from the Crown chosen from their peers, Maori chosen by them, and hopefully, you will have some who will cover one or two or more groups. But yeah, so I would like that written in. And if you are hearing from Paula Tesorerio and some of the people who've been involved in that Whaikaha tripartite process, it's not unusual. It happens in other places, but I think they've done it particularly well. And I would like that to be the model.
Yeah.
Process.
Thank you for that. And I like how you mentioned around the messaging too. I'll take that on board. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for a really thoughtful and thought-provoking submission. We really appreciate your having come in. I don't know the answer to your question on the lanyard, but I am pleased to see that we are taking the right steps in the right direction.
It should be rolling out to MP's offices soon.
Yes, my office has started going through those steps up in Whangarei. So
thank you.
Have a lovely day. And while we're getting our next submission, can I just say, Alan, welcome, our interpreter, welcome to the committee, and thank you for your mahi. And Donna, thank you for your mahi. All right, we have our next submitter here. Welcome. My name is Emily Henderson, and I'm the chair today. Around the table, we have Teresa Nagobi, who is a Labour MP. We have Penny Simmons from National, and we have Tony Severin from ACT. You have your time starting now, and it is up to you as to how you use it, Mr. King. You have 10 minutes. You can take it as read that we have read your written submission that you presented us. It would be great if you could pause a couple of minutes before the end, and if you like, I'll just hold up a hand then to let us just see whether there are any questions in the room, because sometimes it's really helpful to have a discussion on some points you raise. Otherwise, it's over to you, and thank you very much for being here.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. My name is David King. I'm going to look at the screen, which may mean that I'm looking away from you, but it just feels weird otherwise. So sorry about that. Yes, you've read my submission. I really wanted to focus on one point, and that is about mental health disability and its relationship to this bill. most people, when they think accessibility issues, think physical accessibility, but mental health disability is actually the biggest disability in the world, depression in particular, and there's an increasing body of evidence which shows that depression and other mental health disabilities are not just psychological or individual matters, but they are a rational response to the social world in which we live. And in particular, there's a huge trend of depression for young people now and anxiety as well. And the social world they live in sends constant signals that they have to be perfect, that they're at risk of being judged not good enough, and that they're at risk of being rejected. And we need to think as a society, how do we construct a social world in which those sort of signals are not being sent to people so that they can actually access a social world in which they can fully participate. And that goes to the overall values and attitudes that we have as a society, and it goes to what are the nature of our workplaces and public sector institutions and so on. And it's a big issue, but I would really like to see this bill clarify that this is about mental health disability as well as about physical disability, because there is no one else in government looking at this issue. And the mental health area takes very much a medical model of mental health issues. It doesn't look at the wider social determinants and the social construct, as it were. And I think I'll just leave it at that and welcome any questions. I say all of this as someone who has continues to experience depression and anxiety, has battled for many, many years to overcome what are the very real social barriers to participating in social life, and in particular in the workplace. And I actually gave up work a year or two ago because I could no longer put the energy in anymore into overcoming those obstacles. And I can tell you I've been as healthy as I've ever been as a result. And it's something bizarre about the world when a person is healthier not working. And I've actually, through volunteering my time doing public policy work as a former public sector official this year, you might remember me from the Oranga Tamariki Oversight Bill. I worked with Jonathan Boston on that. It's been the most fulfilling year of my life, and but it's been the lowest paid. So there's something weird going on in the world, and I think we need to do something about it. Big issue.
Thank you. And, it takes a lot of courage to actually bring your own experience to the table, particularly when you're talking about mental health and often the stigma that attracts. So I really do thank you for coming today. We have got a question from Teresa Nagobi.
Oh, thank you, and agree with Emily. Thank you for, I guess, also overcoming your own barriers to come in and advocate today as well, because I know that can be huge as well. Having worked in the mental health and disability sector for over a decade, I know I've seen some of the barriers and also have had those barriers myself in my own mental health. So thank you for your advocacy. I'm really interested around, and you're right, how we can clarify in the bill or make it clearer around what to include the mental health aspect to access, or barriers at times to accessibility as well. Given your policy, I think I'd be really interested just to hear just a little bit more around how you think we could do that. How we bring that into the bill to make sure that it's really clear that this includes all disabilities, including mental health as well.
Sure. Well, I think good question. The first thing is that the bill doesn't actually include a definition of disability. And if it did that, if it used the definition under the Human Rights Act, then it would make clear that it is in regard to mental health disabilities. And then in regard to the barriers, that it's about the social barriers as well as the physical barriers, I suggest that that could be addressed by the definition of accessibility barriers in the bill, which doesn't specify one way or the other currently, but the default is always for people to think physical barriers. And if it could specify the physical and social barriers, then that would be a great addition.
Apologies, Emily, this is Isabel, you're on mute.
Well, that was silly of me. Apologies.
No problem.
Listen, thank you very much for coming in, and thank you for thoughtful and well-reasoned submission. And we do have a question from Tony, but Tony, we're actually at time.
No, that's fine. I was just going to say thank you for addressing those things.
Thank you.
All
Pleasure
right,
to see
thank
you.
you very much, and we
Cheers.
hope to see you again.
Okay, thank you.
Right, our next submitter is Mr. Mike Gourley, and he's coming in by Zoom.
Sorry, Madam Chair, it's Isabel again. He is not on the call yet, and we don't have any other submitters in attendance.
Should we just
Yes, that's what I would
wait quietly? Okay.
Yeah, if you could give us a couple of minutes, we'll see if we can get in touch with him.
Sure.
Thank you.
So 2023 people. Isabel,
Yes, Madam Chair.
I've just noticed that on the agenda, Mr. Gourley isn't actually due until 10:30.
Yes, I just noticed that too. Oh, I think he's actually just popped in now. Would you like me to bring him?
Yes, let's go ahead. If we could reschedule a break at some point later on, I'm sure the rest of the committee would be grateful.
Of course. Thank you.
Mr. Gourley, welcome to Subcommittee A from the Social Services Select Committee.
Glad to be here.
My name is Emily Henderson. I'm the acting chair today.
Right.
Just to introduce you to the people around the table, we have Tony Severin from ACT.
Yes.
We have Penny Simmons, although she's currently off screen, she has been here from National. And
Yep.
we have Teresa Nagobi from
Yep.
Labour, and I'm also from Labour.
Hi, Teresa. Yes.
And we have Alan on deck as our interpreter.
I know Alan, yes.
So you have 10 minutes, and thank you very much for
you.
coming in early.
Right.
It's very helpful. You can use them as you wish. I
Okay.
think you're a fairly experienced advocate, so you know this process.
Yeah.
Just take it as read that we've read your submission, but if you wouldn't mind
Yes.
pausing a couple of minutes from the end just to see if there's any questions.
Well, I thought maybe I should tell you a bit about myself.
Great.
For 40 of my 66 years, I've been involved in disability advocacy, rights, everything from employment, recreation to accessibility issues. But I was born with a physical disability that affects my upper limbs. But my main issue then was doorknobs. I needed to have a lever handle rather than a thing you had to try and wind round. So until 11 years ago, when I had a major stroke, and maybe reliant on a wheelchair, I became very, very much aware, not just intellectually, but absolutely to core of my being, access issues. Yeah, so my main contention in my submission is that the accessibility legislation, as it stands, lacks any standards or enforceable human rights. So to me, that makes the bill a bad bill. And I defer to the experts in my community who've made this suggestion many times that in fact it's better to have no bill than a bad bill, or no act but a bad act. Because I think of other areas of our lives that have standards like workplace health and safety, healthy homes, all these acts require standards. In fact, just recently we know that the compliance with healthy homes has been extended for a couple of years in some cases. So we do have examples where we have standards. And indeed, I was very involved with Barrier-Free Trust back in the day, and the late Bill Wrightson, who was very emphatic about the fact that we needed standards. And we had NZ 4121, and that got included in the Building Code, the Building Act, which was about accessible building in the built environment. So unless we've got enforceable standards, I believe the bill is too bad to be passed in its present form. That's my contention. There we go.
So
That's
we have
all to say, really.
We have a question from Teresa.
Yes, sure.
So I'll let her go first, and then I might chime in. And a question from Tony.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, kia ora, Mike. Lovely to see you.
Kia ora, Teresa. Yes.
Thank you for always doing so amazing in this advocacy space. I hear what you're saying around the enforcement. So that's definitely something that we're hearing from some of the other submitters.
Yes.
What would that look like? But I am interested in just hearing you say sometimes we have this is a bad bill, but sometimes some people say it's better to have something than nothing. My question would be, is this a good start? I know that it hasn't got all everything that we want in there, but is this a good start? Just having also worked, in the disability and mental health sector for a really long time now, is this a good start and something we can build on? Even past the select committee, if you know what I mean, Mike. Like you're saying, when we start to work towards what does those standards look like. Someone else mentioned the tripartite model that Whaikaha are doing, things like that. So yeah, that would be my question to you.
Yeah. I believe the bill had much promise. The idea that we'll finally have legislation to govern accessibility right across all aspects of our lives. That was a good promise, but unfortunately, what we've got in practice is very short of the mark. So as I say, it would be better to have no act than a bad act.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was also going to be my question, so we will pass now to Tony.
Right. Hey, Tony.
Hello, Mike. Thank you. My question would be, if you wanted to see some standards put into it now, what would be some of those standards that you think that we could act on sort of now to help with some of the enforcement?
Well, I think that NZ 4121 still pertains. So I would say, let's go to that as a way of examples of standards that have already been incorporated into the Building Act. And yes, so that's where I would say we should look. We should look at examples where we've got standards already and say, how can we move that example into this legislation? Yes.
No, thank you, Mike. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. We really appreciate it.
Okay, right. Thank you for your work. Okay. Look forward to promising results. Thank you, Teresa. Thanks.
Yes,
Tony.
always challenging
Thank you,
to make
Alan.
a start.
All right.
Always
Okay.
challenging to make a start.
It is, yes, of course. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, is that okay then?
Thank you, Mike.
No, thank you. Bye for now.
Bye. Now, I'm just going to ask Isabel, are we ready to go with our next submitter, although we're now running 10 minutes early? Isabel, are you able to tell us, have we got our next submitter, given that we're 10 minutes early, or do we now need to take our break?
We have Cycling Action Network. We do have them here.
Great.
Right,
Okay.
we'll just bring them up to the witnesses table. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou, to the Cycling Action Network. It's lovely to have you with us and thank you for taking the time. Ko Emily Henderson aho, I'm the acting chair today. In the room with us, we have our interpreter Donna. We have Labour MP Teresa Nagobi. We have ACT MP Tony Severin and National MP Penny Simons. The time is yours. You can take it that we have read your written submission and you can use this time as you want. You have your, but if a couple of minutes beforehand you could pause to see if there's questions in the room, that would be really helpful.
Okay, kia ora koutou, tōku ingoa Patrick Morgan from Cycling Action Network. Our submission was pretty short. I wanted the time to find some stories from some of the people in our community to make their points. I'm well aware that I've got the privilege of currently being able-bodied, and I'm in the position to hopefully represent the views of some of the people with disabilities in our community. The Cycling Action Network believes cycling should be available to everyone regardless of age or ability, and we adopt the social model of disability that I'm sure you're familiar with. I want to share briefly 3 stories from our supporters. Firstly, Richard. Richard was 28 when he had a seizure completely out of the blue. He went to Hutt Hospital and we were shocked when the CT scan revealed a brain tumour. It was benign, but too large to remove surgically. Richard was going to have to live with it. He had a number of seizures that year, while the doctors tried many different drugs to get them under control. And in the end, he had radiotherapy. The seizures eventually settled. As a result, Richard couldn't drive. When you suffer from seizures, you have to go a year without one before you can drive again. People with brain tumours cannot drive at all. At the time of diagnosis, Richard was a teacher and drove to work every day. He decided to follow his dreams and apply for a PhD, which meant moving to a university science lab. He could cycle the 40 minutes there and back each day. There was no public transport and walking was too far. Richard did this for the next 7 years while he completed his PhD and worked. He had a couple of seizures while traveling, but had enough warning that he could get off his bike and sit down on the pavement. One of his worries was that car drivers wouldn't know he might need a bit of extra time or extra room when they were passing him. He never came to harm, but he would have been so much happier if there'd been a bike lane. Unfortunately, Richard's tumour turned malignant a few years ago and he died 2 years ago. I know if he was alive today, he would have come himself to talk to you about how life-giving his bike was. It brought him freedom without having to rely on family and friends for travel. Many people have hidden disabilities like a seizure disorder and can't drive. Bikes can make all the difference to them, and bike infrastructure allows them to be fully engaged in our society. This is Hilleke's story. Apologies for not being there in person. It's a busy time of year and getting places takes up a lot of energy and time for me these days. My name is Hilleke Townsend, and for the past 10 years, I've worked as a cycle skills instructor, teaching our children and adults to ride bikes. 6 years ago, I co-founded a charity called Ekerua Rebicycle. We give away bikes to anyone who needs them, 2,000 so far. Over this time, I've seen firsthand and heard from many people living with disabilities who have benefited massively from having access to a safe bike or trike. On Saturday, I heard from a community centre worker who shared what a difference it makes for her elderly visitors who have lost their licence to be able to safely ride an electric tricycle around. Our charity has helped former refugee kids with injuries from war zones to regain their strength and balance. Young people with permanent disabilities retain their independence and mobility, and people suffering from mental health issues find some inner peace and calm. Over the past year, I've experienced this myself. Earlier this year, I started suffering from lightheadedness and tachycardia. This has been diagnosed as dysautonomia. There's been many new cases of this since COVID. I'm seeing 6 different specialists and have tried 5 medications, the latest one costing $65 a week. No one and nothing really helps so far, except exercise to keep my heart strong, which is hard to do when the simple act of standing is exhausting. Riding an e-bike can make my heart rate jump to 180. At my age, that's not something I should be doing. So I've had to relearn how to ride a bike, in this case, a recumbent bicycle. It's the one form of exercise that seems to work for people with orthostatic intolerance. I've got 2 young kids, so I need to be able to get around. Hilleke says, I'd like to ask the committee to remember the importance of access and mobility, not just for the most seriously affected by disability, but for those who are trying to retain as much independence as possible. Bike scooter, mobility scooter lanes, and lower speeds, safe footpaths, and places to sit, all of this built infrastructure needs to be supported at the highest levels. It needs to be written into the law, such as the bill you're considering today, so that new infrastructure supports all levels of mobility and gives everyone choices on how they get around. So I guess to summarise, we know from the reports from our supporters in our community that riding a bike or trike is a really important way to retain people's independence and mobility. And we should never make the mistake that all disabilities are visible or that all disabilities require access to a car. Disabilities are really diverse, and bike lanes are an important part of the solution, and I commend your work today. Any questions, please?
Yes, we have 2 questions for you. First is from Tony and then from Teresa.
Thank you very much for that submission. I totally agree with you. I've seen several trikes here in Christchurch, and things have been made a little bit easier with the infrastructure being changed because of our quake. It's been a lot more easier to reform our streets. But just going back about being invisible, and as Oscar said earlier, the land lids with the sunflower on it. And I was just wondering if we look down the track, I know it's not quite in the bill, but something like that, if we've got a universal symbol like of that sunflower, that we could also incorporate in those with cycling, if we don't have cycling lanes in all the available areas, but we make education part of this ongoing process and use a symbol like that. So if people have a flag on their bike, that we identify them as needing that extra time. And then my next question is about education around bowels, because as you also guess, we have a lot of blind disabled or low vision disabled, and their biggest complaint with cyclists, even myself, who's a runner around Hagley Park, is you don't hear them necessarily coming up behind you, and you can get a very good fright. So that could be another thing that we could all work together to include about, to make sure that things are more accessible and it's fair for all those that have different disability needs and requirements, and how we could, I know this is about that, but this is something we can think of, if not this bill, for future, how we can incorporate these things to include all disabilities.
Okay, thanks for your question, Tony. We're all a bit jealous of the bike infrastructure in Christchurch. You're really leading the way for New Zealand, but I'm sure other cities are about to catch up. First, your question about some kind of visual identification. I know when people are learning to drive, there's often an L symbol. That may be helpful, but actually I wouldn't want to speak for the disabled community on that. I think there's potential risks in potential stigmatization. As well as that, we need to look out for everyone on our streets, whether they have an L plate or a sunflower or not. Everyone deserves to be safe in our community. Second, your question on bells. This can be quite a divisive issue. I know some people are really fans of it, but a lot of people find them quite rude and gives the impression that someone is really shouting at you. As well as that, not everyone hears fully. So I get it that a bell may seem an attractive solution, but I think we need to be careful there's no unintended consequences. Most people have the ability to call out, so a cheerful good morning if someone is using a shared path can work just as well. Thanks for your question.
Okay, Teresa.
Oh, kia ora, and thank you for your submission. And just really quickly, I absolutely agree. And we heard from some of the other submitters earlier that, not all disabilities are seen. So thank you for making sure we're reminded of that. I also just wanted to mention that I sit on the Transport Committee as well. So you would have seen we have the Interregional Rail bill, or listening to submissions at the moment. That is another place where I guess a national strategy in terms of cycleway, walking, other modes of transport has been brought in, even though it is the interregional rail. So you might want to, just a suggestion, hearing some of those great stories you shared this morning, for your people to go and have a look at as well. And then also yesterday, a whole raft of announcements were made regionally about the better of transport choices. So one of those is a cycle walkway, or supporting the cycle walkway in the Otaki electorate and the Horowhenua end. So there are some work being done. However, my pātai, or my question is really around, we've also heard from people that this bill doesn't go far enough, or doesn't, I guess, really address the accessibility issues for people with disabilities. So my question to you is, because just bringing it back to this bill, what do you think of the bill? What are cycle, ways to think of the bill? Do you think it's a really good start? Bearing in mind, you'd like us to make sure that we have, I guess, Mike, I think, mentioned earlier, to be a bit more clear around the definitions around disabilities. But other than that, what do you think of this bill? Is this a good start?
Sure, thanks. We did actually submit to the Transport Committee on interregional rail. So please go back and have a look at our submission if you get a chance. And I take your point about the announcements yesterday about more transport choices. Great to see Levin getting some money there. I know Highway 1 causes a lot of severance in your community, so addressing that, I think it's a really good thing. Yeah, just your question about what do we think of the bill. I have to say, I had a good look through it, and from my point of view, I had trouble seeing much that was really tangible in there that will, I guess I was looking for more specifics there rather than, you know, talking about a new committee structure. I get the point that the disabled community is nothing about us without us. So I think that's a good step forward. Whether it goes far enough, I think I don't have a strong view on that, but thank you for your question.
Okay, well, listen, Patrick, thank you very much. And if you wouldn't mind thanking those who allowed you to bring their stories forward from us all on the committee. It's really good to have those sorts of personal experiences before us. And as another person who's celebrating money for the shared path in Whangarei this morning, yeah, it'll be really good to see more accessible cycling paths around. Thank you for coming.
Kia ora koutou, thank you. I had many more stories, but in the interest of using our time, I just selected 2. So thank you for doing those.
They were well chosen. They were well chosen, Patrick. And I think the sense of the way in which disability can affect us over the course of a lifetime and change over the course of a lifetime is a really important message. So grateful to you for those people.
Absolutely, it's not a binary thing. I expect most of us have had periods in our life when our ability is impaired some way or other. I know I have, so thank you for your work.
Me too. All right, thank you very much. Now, we're still running a little bit ahead of time, so which is a rare and exciting concept for all of us. Isabel, do we have our next submitter, or do we need to break it for a minute?
Let me just double check, Madam Chair. Do we have Kay Jones in attendance? Yes, we do.
Oh, wonderful. Magic.
So where's the camera that I face?
Straight ahead of you, actually, Ms. Jones.
Which is very disconcerting that you are up there and I'm looking there. So please excuse any confusions if I look to your faces, because I have tinnitus, and while I can hear, I find being able to see a person and read lips somewhat really helps my understanding of what people are asking. So I've jumped a little bit because I was expecting to see people around the table with me. But, you know.
Well, Ms. Jones, you're very welcome to look at our faces. We fully understand that, and we will not take it amiss. In fact, you may see our eyes drifting to various bits of the screen because, of course, for us,
if I could,
the faces are in different places also.
Yes, thanks very much, Emily. If I could just suggest for future appearances, if it's possible for the tech people to put a screen below the camera, that would make it a lot easier for some other submitters. It would have made it easier for me. Kia ora, ko Kay Jones tōku inga. Well, I'm a 5th generation disabled New Zealander. Many of my disabilities have come with me through age or accident, but I'm also neurodivergent and have a very busy brain, which means I'm always looking for solutions, because like people who enter Parliament as MPs or policymakers, I want to make a difference. I want to see improvement, and I'm sure that you all do this too. I'm sorry to see that Teresa has left our committee. Will she be coming back?
I think that, sorry, Ms. Jones, I was going to do a brief introduction and just say that one of the things that is happening for all of our people, so we have Tony from Acton Christchurch, we have Penny who is rural, we have me rural, and we have Teresa who's in Levin. We are all having slight connectivity issues. So what's happening is people are dropping out so that they can continue to hear and make the most of the bandwidth that they have.
And I just wanted to awhi to Teresa, because my parents retired to Otaki and lived there for more than 20 years. And as their infirmities became more severe, they had severe challenges with the transport connections because Otaki is quite isolated.
And I'm jumping ahead of my written sort of material, but we've got time, because there are two parts to my submission and that of many others. One is the very real need for disabled New Zealanders to get better service, awareness, and options for challenging when we don't get good service. So for that, there are lots of stories of disabled New Zealanders and how we have been treated by systems and the lengths we have to go to exercise our civil and human rights. But the other side that I'm perhaps also wanting to touch on is deficiencies with the proposed bill. And as a former policy advisor with government who has drafted legislation, who has been submitting on matters for many years, you may not remember me from my submissions on the Births, Deaths, Marriages, Relationship Registration Amendment Bill and the Conversion Practices Prohibition Bill. Sorry, Alan, I know that that's a long mouthful, just say previous bills. But I'm passionate about Aotearoa New Zealand being the best it can be for all people. Okay. So to start with, this bill does not deliver anything new. It does not make substantive changes. I have in my recommendation to say that it should be withdrawn and go back to the table. And there are two parts to that. But before I even do that, I want to just address a very small matter, but it's also big. The name of the bill is wrong. This is not about accessibility for New Zealanders. This is about accessibility within Aotearoa New Zealand. Anyone who is living here, visiting here, whether they are a tourist, an international student, a migrant worker, visiting on a delegation, they should be entitled to be able to use facilities and services the same way that, maybe not exactly the same way, but without the barriers put there because there's no provision made for disabled people. And just as a side note for those interested in Aotearoa's economic future, there is a vast untapped market for accessible tourism. If Aotearoa New Zealand was truly accessible, then we would be able to market as a destination to come. At the moment, we have uneven experiences, and some people say, yes, Wellington is great, but then any disabled person who lives here is able to tell you, no, actually not in all areas. So if we were able to be truly 100% accessible, or at least making accommodations for people to have a workaround, a way to actually get services and facilities we need, then we would be able to say, hey, yes, we're accessible, come here with your wealthy American English sort of elderly sort of population and bring all your friends, because we are living in a world where developed worlds have got aging populations. And as people will have told you, there are many age-related conditions that impose on people. My vision impairment, I only found through having to stare at Zoom screens so long that I have photophobia, which is reaction to brightness and glare. It's okay in the room. This room's a little bit bright, but it's tolerable. But glaring at a screen that is like a website with shocking pink or something means I can't actually take the information in. So that's a minor thing. And I give feedback to every single website provider that is in that situation, which means I have the burden of educating. So I jump all over the place. That's one of my things. So going back to this, I mentioned in my submission that I have been complicit with imposing barriers or discriminatory behaviour upon other people. Now, obviously, I don't wish to do that. But back in the 1980s, when I was a public servant working for an agency recruiting staff, my manager instructed me to write up interview notes to disadvantage a wheelchair using applicant and to pump up the value of another applicant who he thought he could work with more easily. Now, this was before the Human Rights Act, before the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, before even a lot of equal employment opportunities rulings that may have enabled me as a lowly ranked public servant to challenge that manager. I did not have that ability, but that guilt over the fact that the only reason that person didn't get the job was because they were a wheelchair user and the manager wasn't sure if they could fit into the office. That shouldn't happen. And yet, there are probably cases where that type of attitude still happens. Now, one of the things that I have appreciated in the last few years, oh, kia ora, Teresa, lovely to see you back. I gave shout out to the fact that my parents had retired to Otaki and the fact that they'd found that the challenges there of the transport. So totally thanks to the government and all members for improving public transport, because it is so essential for people to get around. Also, of course, Otaki having special place in my heart is one of the places. It may not be formal co-governance, but the levels of community engagement is really real. So my mother Pākehā was still invited to play golf with the Māori Women's Golfing Club because, you know, that openness and a sort of kaupapa Māori of being welcoming to people. So I'm not saying that that's the only thing, but it's something that I associate with Otaki. And again, it's that thing of when you have a culture that is welcoming and people think about how can we make it easier for you to be part of this space, it does a lot for the people who are welcomed in.
I could not agree more, Deb. And if I can, in that same spirit, say that Penny would quite like to actually have that opportunity for a bit of discussion with you now, if that's okay. We've got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, sorry, I did just want to touch, Penny, I will get to your thing, but just to mention the difference between accessible websites, which government has spent more than 10 years under a range of different leaderships to make it work, but not done anything on accessible documentation. So the hours I spend educating public servants and others on why PDFs are not accessible, that length of time, I almost totted up the hours to send the government a bill. It didn't do that. But thank you, Penny.
Thank you, Kay. Wonder if you could just tell us, you know, what country you think is doing this the best?
Well, there's two parts to that question. One is no one's perfect. Two is the most recent country that's engaged with its disability community to bring through legislation change is Canada. And in the regulatory statement prepared by officials who were not themselves disabled or part of that system, I'm assuming, they said, oh, that's too new to say whether or not it is working. Well, isn't that the point? That this is new. We want the latest. We don't want something that, like in America, yes, the ADA is important, but that's because they have a litigious society, and if you've got the threat of suing somebody, you can get action. That's not the model that we want to go down in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, I've got a background in the tech sector, and I also, you know, am part of the data and digital community of practice. So where we go is co-design and collaboration with others. So yes, it would be really appropriate to be having the discussions with other governments and disabled persons or organisations overseas about what they have found worked and what doesn't, but also to have the discussions. Now that you've been down a year or two, what would you change? What would you improve? What did you leave out because of political pressures, others that you'd like to have in? What did you put in that you didn't need to have in? So that should be an interactive discussion. And that's one of the reasons why I think this bill should be withdrawn and taken away. Not because there's not good intent, but because it achieves nothing. And it also sets up barriers to further progress. So you've got a brand new Waikaha ministry, which is just now building its capacity for that engagement. What better note of faith could the government give than to say, look, we realise this isn't good enough. Let's give it to the ministry, to Paula and her people, to have a better engagement with the people and to come through with a draft legislation, maybe looking at the Canadian model, that has standards and rights and a process, not standard themselves, but like a regulation making power so that the secondary legislation can be built to have more steps. It needs to be an iterative process because, like, you may remember that in 2020, there was an update to the Privacy Act. And as the Privacy Commissioner said, the Privacy Act 1993 was good for the time it was written, and it's held up well.
Okay.
And the bill didn't make enough changes.
All right.
That's the thing. It needs to be iterative. So
Thank
sorry.
you, Kate. Listen, we're not going
Teresa's
to
got
get
a
to we're not going to get to Teresa. I'm sorry, we are at time. But listen, thank you very much. You know, particularly in the last, what you've just said in the last few minutes was particularly interesting for me. So thank you. Really thoughtful, really helpful. And I know that I will be able to say on behalf of my colleague from Otaki that she believes it is the greatest place in the world and will be immensely buoyed by your comments about the inclusivity of her community.
I did love living in
Could she ever
Christchurch.
meet your parents?
I did love living in Christchurch, and there the people were used to cycles, and so they supported it. So the changes you could make for cycle inclusion there would not work in Wellington, which is hilly. But that is, again.
Yes, no, as a past resident of the flat Cambridge, UK bicycle capital, I fully endorse those comments. All right, well, thank you so much for giving us your time and your expertise in this sector. And in government, in fact. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you another time on another bill.
Thank you.
All right, now we have our next submitter, I'm hoping, CAB. Mr. Hubbard.
Sure.
Mr. Hubbard, thank you for coming before us. Emily Henderson, aho, I'm the acting chair. Donna is our interpreter for this session, and around the virtual table, I'm sorry, this is not a parliamentary sitting day, which is why we're not with you. We're using our constituency days to make sure we hear from everyone. We have Tony Severin from ACT, we have Penny Simmons from National, we have Teresa Nagobi from Labour, and myself also from Labour. If I can just say to you before we start, Teresa and Penny and I are experiencing some connectivity issues. So if we suddenly drop our screen, it's not that we're not still here, it's that we're using our bandwidth to listen. And this next 15 minutes are entirely yours. You can take it as read that we have read your submissions though. And if you wouldn't mind leaving a couple of minutes for questions at the end, that'd be excellent.
Sure. And I'm also going to do this, look at the screen.
Absolutely fine.
Because it's too strange otherwise.
It's all right. You'll see me drifting to the corner of my screen as well. If I suddenly start looking off to the side, it's because that's where you are on my screen. So completely understand that. Take it away.
Kia ora koutou. And your connectivity problem is going to be exactly on point for part of what I'm talking about today. So I'm here on behalf of CAB, Ngā Pou Whakawhiranaki o Aotearoa. We've been providing a service to the communities from Invercargill to Kerikeri for more than 50 years, and accessibility is absolutely essential to our service. We call ourselves a universal service, which means anyone can come to us about anything. And so we recognise both for our own service, but also the experience of our clients, how important accessibility of particularly public services, but a whole range of services are to people. And so our submission on this bill is really a result of seeing the experience and challenges that clients have when they come to us, because often they come to us when they strike a barrier, when they can't access the service, when they're having difficulties. And so we really see the range of things that impact on the ability of people to access, particularly public services, as an area that we're particularly concerned about. And we see there's a whole range of things which are bound up with disability, including things like age, literacy issues, not having English as a first language. There's a whole range of barriers that actually could be impacted by a bill which was addressing accessibility, particularly in the public service. So one of the things that I really wanted to reflect on in talking about the bill today was a campaign that we've been running for inclusion in a digital age. And this campaign really came out of the experience of seeing clients struggling to access public services as public services move more towards a digital first or sometimes even digital only approach to the provision of services. And what we have been seeing in our service is that, yes, those services increase accessibility for some people and are really good. So no question that those, having digital public services is a good thing. But what we're seeing is that there are people who are being left behind, often people who are already marginalised, being further marginalised by the struggle to access public services. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is a pattern of public services where they're making deliberate decisions to try and drive people to digital channels, even if that's not the channel that's most useful, most accessible, and the one they want to use. And so our campaign is really about there should be equitable access to services regardless of how you want to access them, whether that's digital services, face-to-face services, phone services, other online channels. And that's really what our campaign is focused on, and recognising that public services are a human right. Everyone needs to have equitable access to public services, which unfortunately isn't what we're seeing now. And one of the things that's really concerned me over the last couple of years when we've been running this campaign is recognising that we're seeing people who are becoming more and more distrustful of government because of the withdrawal of government services. When there are no more services in your local community, when all your services are remote, you never have any interaction with them. Your only experience is trying to ring up, say, work and income and waiting 80 minutes on the phone while the entire time they're telling you you should do this online. And the clear message that those clients are getting is, I'm a bother to government. I'm not someone who government wants to serve. I'm the problem. And so we've been running a campaign about trying to ensure equitable access to public services. And one of the biggest barriers that we've struck in this campaign is trying to find a lever for a change in how public services operate. Yes, we've had some really good interactions with some individual government agencies as a result of the report and the campaign. And a shout out here to IRD, who's been really responsive actually to the issues we've addressed. Not every government agency has, however. But one of the things we looked at when we were launching this campaign is what are the levers for making sure that accessibility and equitable access to services is central to public services across the whole public service. So, not having to go to every single public service, which there are millions of touch points, but looking at what can drive change. And apparently nothing can, has been our experience. We went and talked to the Chief Digital Officer as a start, and, it was very much, I'm just responsible for digital public services. If other agencies decide to cut all the other services, that's none of my responsibility. I don't have any levers over that. And it's very similar talking to the Public Services Commission as well. And so what has become really clear to us is there's not a really central driver for what makes a good public service. And so we were really excited when we saw that this bill was being developed, and we're thinking, oh, look, finally there'll be a lever that's, can drive accessibility to the core of the public service. And so I read the bill and I was looking for the lever and looking for the lever, and all I found was a little tiny twig that would barely move a pebble, let alone the huge public service. And that, I guess, is the upshot of our view on this bill is absolutely the problem it's trying to resolve is real. And so, if you look at the background to what the bill is saying, I think it describes it as lack of clear government leadership on accessibility issues and fragmented approach by overly reliant on individual agencies, which is exactly what we see across accessibility as a whole to public services. So totally agree with the issue the bill is trying to address, but struggle to see how it's actually going to drive meaningful change. We need something that's actually got some teeth, some ability to enforce, and some ability to set some standards around what accessible public services look like. And so deeply, I guess, disappointed and also really concerned that it's a big lost opportunity here. It's a lost opportunity to make a real difference. If the bill goes ahead as it is, it's really hard to see something else coming in place that will have those ability to have a lever for change. And so we think, kind of in mixed minds about whether there should be a complete review of the bill as a whole, or whether it can be fixed through adding some particularly ability to create meaningful accessibility standards, so ones which have some sort of regulatory power and that there's some sort of enforcement mechanism over those, while recognising, yes, we need to be open about the diversity of services that will be covered by this, and so there needs to be flexibility, and so some of those standards might be non-binding, some might be binding, but it's about creating a structure which will drive real change. And you know, our concern is this structure won't drive real change, and that's what we need. You're muted, Emily.
Gosh, I should know this by now. Listen, thank you very much. That was a really interesting submission, and take your point. We haven't got any questions, so I think we'll just thank you for your service, but also thank you to CAB. The work you guys do is really awesome. Really awesome.
It's International Volunteers Day today, and there's more than 2,000 CAB volunteers across the country. Yeah, so they do an amazing job with a really challenging but rewarding role.
Yep, indeed. And a shout out to my local Whangarei CAB and Owen Sanders, amongst others, who's been working there for many, many years, and also across the community. It's wonderful.
There are a lot of really, really dedicated volunteers who've committed so much time and energy to supporting their communities. And, you know, very much our submission day is really driven by what they're seeing in the community, and that's what's driven our campaign as well. It's, you know, it's not coming from an ideological or predetermined point of view. It's very much driven by actually what are we seeing happening in these communities right across from Invercargill to Kerikeri, and really seeing the same sorts of issues around accessibility of public services.
And we really appreciate your bringing those thoughts to us. Have a lovely day.
Thanks.
Okay, Isabel, where are we up to?
We now have Jonathan Godfrey, who is here in person.
Wonderful. And Donna, are you now handing over to Alan? Thank you very much. Kia ora, ko Emily Henderson aho. I'm the acting chair today. I'm not sure how long you've been in the select committee room, so I'll just run through.
About an hour.
Oh my goodness, so you've heard me do this spiel many times.
Yes.
Okay, well, in that case, over to you.
It's not lost on me that the disabled person speaking to the select committee got out of bed at 5:15 this morning to catch a train to Wellington to present in person, because this is one of the most important pieces of legislation for disabled people in New Zealand. I agree with the speaker this morning I listened to, that said it's got the wrong name. This bill in its current form is the Let's Entrench Inaccessibility for Disabled People in New Zealand bill. And I'm very well aware that you as a select committee have the power to change that and make it something useful. The end of my written submission, jump straight to the end. This bill is practically worthless unless you fix it. I have to tell you that 2022 has been a pretty amazing year for me. I started the year being honoured with a New Year's honour for the service that I've given over my adult lifetime to blind people in particular, but disabled people in general, starting 30 odd years ago when I was representing students with disabilities. In August this year, I had the pleasure of leading New Zealand's civil society delegation to Geneva, where our progress in implementing the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was evaluated, put under scrutiny, and found wanting. That United Nations committee has sent down a concluding observation that says the select committee needs to work with disabled people and their representative organisations to put it right. And I have listened to other people. In fact, I've tried to put myself in your position as people on a select committee with hundreds of submitters. I was hoping for thousands, but hundreds of submitters. Many people who have submitted for the first time. Many people who did not know how to submit 2 months ago. Many people who have overcome their various access needs to engage in a process that disables many of them. There is credit to parliamentary services deserved, and for you as a select committee, on helping increase the chances of disabled people to engage. The question is, will you now listen? I speak with so many disabled people and their representatives, and I am yet to hear a single disabled person say, this bill is good enough. And if you look through the submissions, and I've only read about 100 of them because I'm not paid to read submissions, I'm paid to be a statistician. So let's put a little statistic on the table for you. 0 disabled people support this bill in its current form. 0. Why? Because it won't change their lives. The intent is exactly what we wanted. We want to live a decent life in our own country. We want access to the same information as other people. We want our voices to matter like other people. But instead, we get a bill that gives us nothing. Nothing that we couldn't have had without this bill and a bit of generosity from a minister. I'm going to suggest, Madam Chair, that I invite your questions and come back for some closing statements if you don't use up all my allotted time.
Okay, I just looking around the room, I can't actually see any questions. Ah, yes, Teresa Nagobi.
Oh, thank you. First of all, for making your trip in to Parliament, but and understanding the challenges for you, but also for your submission. You're right. We have heard from many now that this bill, as it stands, is not something that they can support. This is also the purpose of Select Committee, so we can hear that and see how we can make that bill better. So within saying that, you know, we've heard calls for pausing it, we've heard calls for chucking it out and restarting again. I wonder, I'm not saying that this is the answer, but is this a good, do you think this is a good start and something we can build on? Or are you obviously, also of the mind that we need to just chuck it out? Or is there an opportunity to pause and rework? So I guess I'm asking, is there any good parts of this bill at all that we can work on and add to?
It refers to the Treaty of Waitangi, it refers to the United Nations Convention. That's your 2 good bits in this bill. The rest, I'm sorry, it was developed without disabled people holding the pen. It is a non-disabled person's perspective of what's going to make a difference, and it won't. If you, in your wisdom, think that chucking it out and starting again is the right thing to do, I suggest you do it. And do it now, today. Because you are wasting the time of disabled people coming to submit over the next few months if you're going to toss it out and start again anyway. You're wasting your own time as well. If you have any intention of getting this bill right, in my personal capacity, I am imploring you to stop and start again and demand it be done right with disabled people in key roles holding the pen that drafts this legislation. We know how to make laws that will work for us. It is clear that non-disabled government officials do not. I suggest to you, we have time to get it right. We have plenty of disabled people who have expertise. We have very good representative organisations who will come and help you, but you need to ask for their assistance and demand better from the officials. That's on you as a select committee. And I really hope you do soon.
All right, thank you very much. Now we have Tony.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for your submission. And it was I have actually put your one to my side because I keep submissions that I feel that raise very, very great points. And basically, I just wanted to thank you for your submission, and what you've just said, what I picked out of your submission is what you've just reiterated, that and how I've read a lot of other submissions, I've been getting the feeling is to start over and include the disability in writing with standards and with enforceable binding and non-binary stuff. And this is what I'm guessing is what you were saying as well.
I've got a checklist of 12 things that the current bill does not do. And it starts with the fact that the current bill is disrespectful of disabled people. You would never, as a select committee, have allowed a bunch of male officials to bring in a critical piece of legislation for women. You would never have let a set of Pākehā officials bring in draft legislation that was going to have a crucial impact on the lives of Māori. You would not disrespect women, you would not disrespect tangata whenua, but this bill, in its current form, disrespects disabled people. I think that you, as a select committee, can rise above the crap that you've been dealt. And I really hope you can do so very, very soon. Please, disabled people need you to show some leadership when other non-disabled people have not managed. You are our last hope. If this bill does not get fixed, you will be party to entrenching inaccessibility for disabled people. This bill will force us to go through so much more work to get change made. You are making, with this bill, the lives of disabled people harder to fix. Not easier, harder. And that's a crime. I don't know if you're on mute, Madam Chair, but the last guy.
No, I was just pausing to see whether you had concluded so that I wasn't interrupting you, Mr. Godfrey. Well, listen, thank you very much. It's a hard-hitting submission and obviously an issue about which you feel extremely passionate. Really grateful for you making the time. And I'm sorry that we are not there in person. Monday is a constituency day, and those of us who, like myself, are constituent MPs, are trying to fit in additional select committee hearings so that we can hear from everyone who wants to hear from us. And that means doing it by Zoom so that we can also fulfill our constituent duties. But really grateful to you for coming in and for your views and for your very articulate written submission as well. Thank you.
One understands your position. If one had been told on Friday that he would be on Zoom, he could have stayed home.
Yes,
this is the joys of an inaccessible society. You don't get given the information that you need to make informed decisions as disabled people, and in the end, we use up time. We have our time wasted for us by unthinking non-disabled people. That's part of being disabled in this country.
I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry that you were unaware that that Zoom was an option. I'm really sorry about that. We had tried very hard, but we will have a conversation at the end of the session about how we can do better in that respect. Thank you very much. And I hope your trip home or onto your next appointment is as trouble-free as possible.
To be fair, we were told that Zoom was an option, but we were not told that coming in to be in the room in person, which is important to disabled people, that coming in would not be a good use of our time.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Anyway, right?
Yes, I see.
So
I see. Okay.
I've only just learned sitting back here why you're not here with us, and it's a perfectly reasonable explanation when you know.
And
all right. Well, listen, we will take that.
Echo that. I'm in exactly the same position.
Thank you, Kay. We will take that on board, and I'm sure that the house clerks who are listening will feed that into our process, because this committee in particular, we are constantly working to make our processes in every bill more accessible. So thank you very much for your time. And now I'm afraid we will need to move on to our next submission. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Alan. And now we have Donna again. Who is our next submitter, Isabel? Sorry, not who, but are they ready?
Our next submitter is Gerard, but he is not in the room, it seems, and I don't believe he's on Zoom either. So I would perhaps suggest taking
we take our 10-minute break?
Yes.
Okay, so people, if we could be back in the room by 11:34, so that we are ready to go at 11:35 for Gerard.
I haven't finished, Emily. I could do more.
We missed our 10-minute break, Kay. So I think at this stage we missed our break earlier. So I think at this stage we'll just allow members to go and check urgent emails and things of that nature before we come back. Thank you very much, though. All right, we will see you all soon. Excellent. We're all of us back, just about.
Any of the 3 seats. Apparently the camera is at the opposite end of the table down there.
Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning. My name is Emily Henderson. I'm the acting chair today. I don't know if have you been waiting in the room, or are you new to the room?
It's the first time I've done this.
Okay. Well, in that case, thank you so much for giving us your time. We really do appreciate it. You can take it as read that we have actually read your written submission. So you feel free to use this time as you want, but it would be great if you could pause a couple of minutes from the end and give us the opportunity to see whether there's any questions or requests for a discussion. We are all here on Zoom today because Mondays are normally a constituency day for MPs, and those of us who are electorate MPs have a lot of commitments to our local people. So we're doing this by Zoom so that we can juggle, but it's very important to us that we hear as many people on this bill as possible. So I'm sorry, we would normally be in the room with you. Today we have Donna interpreting, we have myself from Labour, we have Penny Simmons from National Party, Teresa Nagobi from Labour, and Tony Severin from ACT. And if you would like to go ahead, we are ready and waiting.
Yes, thank you. I attended a small Zoom meeting last week, and it was suggested that I introduced with the following, that I don't support this bill as it's currently is written. And I agree with the points raised by Auckland Disability Law and Access Matters. A very important document to me is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I got introduced that a couple of years ago, and it's very relevant, very important, and I'm surprised that not more MPs are familiar with it. I've had some appointments of MPs in the past year or so, and it's so important for us. This document gives me a reason to stay alive. I've been severely disabled for the last 20 years, not invisible disabilities, which I don't know where the camera is actually, but I got this notification from Rare Disorders saying not all disabilities are visible, and I added a little one to the bottom where a person's lying down, and I've spent a lot of time flat on my back as well. I identify with a lot of people with ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, although that's not my main disabilities, but anyway. I'll just deal with the systemic issues rather than my personal problems. And I'm just reading because it's easy for me because I have cognitive issues. It was heartening to read in the media recently that the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was assembled at Geneva, wasn't satisfied with the lack of progress as provided by the New Zealand government delegation. This is regarding the second and third periodic reports of New Zealand compliance with the UNCLPD. The next periodic report by the State Party of New Zealand is expected by 25 October 2030 and will constitute its combined 4th to 6th periodic report. I will be 74 by then, God willing, that is, and I sincerely hope New Zealand can and will do better when that date rolls around. Of course, the Select Committee is concerned about the accessibility for the disabled, which is Article 9 in the UNCRPD. This convention was ratified in 2008, and in 2023, nearly 15 years later, 2023 is what I've been told would be likely to have it made into, I've been told this Disability Act would likely be made into law by then. But the thing, we are still only considering one article. The convention has 50 articles, and at this rate, it'll be 750 years to embrace the entire convention. I had a meeting with a Wellington Regional Community representative of the Disabled Persons Assembly, DPA, about a year and a half ago, and he looked at the UNCRPD as his Bible. I never thought it like that, and until then, he has been absolutely right. I would like to use this and another analogy. I'm not a religious person in the conventional sense, but it isn't the Bible. But isn't the Bible a tapestry of many stories, all being relevant to life? So, likewise with the UNCRPD, all 50 articles have a purpose. So why are we singling out accessibility? We needed New Zealanders with Disability Act, like the Americans have the ADA, which has been in place since 1991. I've organised a meeting with Judy Human, who is an international disability rights advocate, and she's appalled of the lack of recognition we get as disabled people in New Zealand. We now have, since the 1st of July of this year, a Ministry of Disabled People, whaikaha. So why not write up a proper disability act for New Zealanders, especially pertinent considering the recent feedback from the UN Committee at Geneva. There's a few documents I've saved to my phone, and I just am aware of a few issues here that's happened. And I got from Access Alliance, I got a document dated back in December 2020, which outlined the principles of what they wanted as an Accessibility Act. Yet in January 2022, about 40 months later, an MSD document gets released about accessibility. It's titled the Regulatory Input Statement Accessibility Summary for Proactive Release. That's the full title. They considered 4 possible options to address the problem. Option 3 is an enabling legislative framework, and that is their recommended option. Option 4 is an overarching legislation, which is what, just read what the relevant paragraph is. It's a separate regulatory regime that would have the direct ability to establish secondary legislation for code standards and rules for all sectors as they relate to accessibility. This is a common approach in Canadian jurisdictions. And by the way, the Canadian rights for disabled people is not that great anyway. And to continue here, there's the preferred option of Access Alliance. It seems strange that MSD went ahead with their recommendation when the people from the Access Alliance preferred a different option. And yeah, it boggles me. It seems like the MSD document went to the Cabinet Social Wellbeing Committee, which I don't know if that and then that goes to the Social Service and Community Select Committee. I suggest we reject the bill and use input from whaikaha and not MSD next time around, as they have a stronger interest in supporting our rights and making things happen. I've been particularly impressed with having Paula Tessioro as the CEO of whaikaha as well, and she is actually liaising, she's having Zoom meetings with people who live with disabilities, have the lived experience. So she's not just consulting with their upper management, which consults with the middle management, that consults with the lower management, which eventually filters down to us. And she's valuing our input as well, which is I really appreciate and find that so important. Yeah.
We've got a minute to go.
Okay.
Just wondering if you.
That went fast.
It does.
Yeah.
It goes very fast. We have a question from Teresa.
Yeah.
Who I can assure you knows the convention very well.
Thank you for your submission. Sorry, I see my internet's going in and out. My apologies. Thank you for your submission. And hear you when you talk about, and I've heard this from a couple of other submitters now, when you talk about whaikaha, particularly Paula, but whaikaha and their models and their way of engagement. We know that this bill isn't in its perfect form, hence why we have select committee. That's why these bills come through our select committees, to make sure that we can all collectively make it the best bill we can. So I do hear calls to throw it out, but my question to you is, like to others, are there some salvageable parts of this? And taking on some of the submitters' suggestions, for example, working more closely with whaikaha, the engagement staff. Do you think that this bill could be a good start and get us there, or do you think there's no kind of saving it?
Personally, I prefer to start again, but I can't. I haven't got the capacity to answer that question honestly. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, actually, on a point, Teresa, while I'm speaking to you, just an example of accessibility problems that I've encountered.
Actually, Gerard, I'm really sorry, but we actually are over time, and we have another submitter waiting. I'm really sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But thank you so much for bringing your bringing your experience here, and for what was a really thoughtful and learned submission.
Thank you.
Can I say, Chair, you can always email us too if you have anything else.
No,
please do.
Yeah, not my problem. Sorry, it's I've been denied access to you through your office, but contact me, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I just forget the name. What next?
What next? Actually, she said there was a submitter, but I actually thought.
Isabel, I'm just looking back at the time frame, and while Gerard is actually at overtime for himself, I'm noticing that our next submitter has a few minutes before they are due. What's the story there?
Yes, so we do have a 20-minute break between now and the next submitter, which is Association of Blind Citizens New Zealand, which is in the room.
All right, on the basis that we're over time and this is a break and this is a constituency day, Gerard, I am going to let everyone go because I know there's a lot of demands on some of our committee members' time at the moment. So I'm just going to go and let them have their 20-minute break to check their emails and their phone messages. Thank you very much for your time. All right, guys, we are all due back here, as you'll be aware, at 12:05. So go and transact your business as quickly as you can, and we'll see you soon. Hello again, Mr. Godfrey.
Greetings.
Back with your other hat on. We've got
One of them.
a minute before we're due to start, so I'll just get the formalities underway and just introduce Teresa's had to go because, as I mentioned earlier, it's a constituency day, so we're juggling various appointments. But Dan Rosewarren is here from Labour. And just to reiterate for you, Ms. Wilkinson, I'm not sure whether you were in the room earlier,
Yes.
but we are having the occasional connectivity issue. So if Penny or I have a screen go blank, it's not that we're not here, it's just that we're trying to preserve bandwidth. Otherwise, you can take it as read. We've read your submission, which was excellent. But yeah, do use this time as you wish. But if you want to pause a couple of minutes before the end and give us a little time for discussion, that would be appreciated. Otherwise, you have 15 minutes now.
Okay. Well, you know who we are, Rose Wilkinson and Jonathan Godfrey from Blind Citizens New Zealand. And so I'll hand over to Jonathan, who's going to speak to our submission, and we will be leaving time for questions. So thank you.
Thanks, Rose. Thank you to the Select Committee. Blind Citizens New Zealand is a disabled people's organisation. We often have to explain what that is and what it means to society, what it means to government, and what actually it should mean to disabled people as well. So a DPO, oh, well, this DPO, we've been around since 1945. People who've had my position as national president have been elected by our peers to lead this organisation, and I am the 16th such person, as it happens. The motto of Blind Citizens New Zealand has been blind people speaking for ourselves, and we have an extremely rich and proud history of handing the relay baton from one person to the next, or one crowd to the next, for making sure that the needs of blind people are heard loud and proud. As a disabled people's organisation, part of our responsibility to our members and actually to our government is to collate the wide range of views that our individual members have and form a collectivised opinion. In this instance, we have had online hui and face-to-face meetings, including time at our annual general meeting and conference. In the end, what we put forward as an organisation reflects the combined efforts of the aspirations and lived experiences of blind, deafblind, low vision, vision impaired, any label you like to have used over the decades, as long as you share our vision of a society that actually includes us. Article 4.3 of the UN Convention is our mandate. Article 4.3 says that the state party, New Zealand, must consult with disabled people's organisations. That's a two-way street, though. There is no point DPOs like ourselves having an expectation to be consulted with if we come to the table without putting in the hard yards first. We can present on numerous issues affecting our members, and I would say it runs into the hundreds of access needs. We work with other DPOs, disabled people's organisations, and universally we have said that we all, disabled people's organisations, we all want better access in New Zealand society for disabled people in our country. But that's not actually what we got with this bill. We did tell officials, and in the end, they had an obligation to consult, but actually they didn't have an obligation to listen. We definitely tried to get involved with officials through every channel we possibly could. But in the end, they preferred to listen to non-disabled people. And as a consequence, the process has failed disabled people. We told the minister, at the time it was Minister Cepoloni, we told the minister that this bill wasn't going to cut it for disabled people. And she said, there is an opportunity for you to take that view to Select Committee because they can fix it. That's their job at Select Committee. And so here we are. Disabled people's organisations by the dozen. Disabled people in their hundreds, all telling you pretty much the same thing. This bill is not good enough. As a DPO, our obligation to work with government, we are ready to help you fix it. We do not expect you as individual MPs or a Select Committee to actually come up with all the answers. You haven't been living disabled people's lives. You can't have as many challenges in your minds as they all collectively do. But right now you do have the control. The United Nations Committee is expecting you to work with disabled people's organisations, so you can help put it right. We've left plenty of time for questions, and we still have some more things to say as concluding remarks if we don't manage to use up all the time answering your valuable questions. Looking forward to them.
I'm looking around the room and I'm not seeing anyone with a question. Is there anyone who would like to speak? Yes, Tony, what's your question?
Not so much a question, but I would like to thank you guys very much for the very robust submission that you guys put through to us. Also, as we all know, there are so many hidden disabilities as well, and likes of myself, I'm a sufferer of dyslexia, even though most of us don't want to be considered disabled because we're very able, and this is the problem that we find. And then also with low vision or vision impaired and blind, that again, there's that varying degrees, and some people are very disabled in that area, like myself, and then others not. And I'm sad to hear that you guys had offered to help beforehand and it wasn't taken up. What is the main thing that you would really want from us as a select committee to do?
We have a number of recommendations that need to be considered, in our opinion. And we don't have the monopoly on good ideas. There would be our ideas and the ideas put forward by other DPOs and individual disabled people as well. But if I was to look for things that are missing, the UN committee actually said we need to embrace reasonable accommodation, and the failure to provide reasonable accommodation in order to meet people's access needs, to suggest that that failure should be a breach under the Human Rights Act. We want to see an independent mechanism. We don't know that it necessarily needs to be a commission, but something independent that's going to be able to make enforceable decrees and expect change, not just talk about it. We are looking for regulations and rules, not just nice little guidelines. We're looking for enforcement. We're looking for timeframes. These are all things you've heard in our and many other submissions. We are looking for an expectation that local government will have to pick up its game as well. There is no statement to suggest that they're going to have to do anything. Similarly, the private sector isn't given an explicit expectation. These are all great ideas for you to put on the table for officials to work on.
Okay, we have a question from Jan Logie, who I believe is in the room with you. Before she says that, I'll just quickly ask my question, which is, this legislation is in part, you could say, part of the infrastructure setting up the Ministry of Whaikaha. I take it that you do agree with the enterprise of a ministry for people living with disabilities. This is a worthwhile enterprise.
We definitely see the value in there being a Ministry of Disabled People, Whaikaha, but we need the access legislation issues to be independent of Whaikaha. Whaikaha in itself is going
I take the point. Yep.
Yeah.
So yes, I take that. Thank you. I'm just aware that there are some views in the room that there should not be a ministry. So it's always interesting to get that perspective. Thank you. We'll now swap to Jan, and we are running very close to time, so I'll ask everyone to just keep it short.
Thank you for your submission. It's a point very clearly and well made. So I'm just, in terms of this committee and that process of actually co-design that's been required of us by the UN, do you think that should be the primary recommendation of this committee, that that process be initiated,
Or do you think it's possible that we could get enough information around the details of how to do this through the submissions?
We think you will get a handle on the magnitude of the problems through the select committee process. But we do not necessarily believe you will get the solution that is required to address the magnitude of the problem. And then to that end, a co-design process where you, with your expertise as MPs, officials with their expertise as well, because you need them, and DPOs on behalf of disabled people, and our extensive and dominating knowledge of this area and what's going on and what will work in this space, being at the table, helping you make the decision. I feel for you guys in that you're being asked to do something for a group of people that, based on the first reading speeches, most MPs don't understand very well. Now, how you take back an updated, modified bill and start to then have to speak on behalf of disabled people that you don't actually represent in the eyes of disabled people, well, not many of them. How you take that back is going to be a challenge. If we can help you take back an improved bill that actually has some chance of being appreciated by disabled people because it will improve their lives, I'll work with you any day. And I'll bring my organisation's efforts to the table because it's important to our people to get this right.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much. Really helpful. Has anyone else got any questions or no? All right. Well, listen, thank you for a really thoughtful submission and a really thoughtful written submission also. We appreciate it very much. And I assure you that we will work and are working very hard to create strong and workable ministry and enabling legislation here.
Thank you. We recognise you haven't been given an easy task. But you can,
if it were easy, it wouldn't be worth doing.
That's what a lot of disabled people are saying.
Thank you. All right. Well, you still do actually have a couple of minutes if you wanted to make concluding remarks.
I think some of the questions have led to the concluding remarks that I was looking for.
Right.
We have very definitely put clear recommendations in our organisational submission and some really good ideas, but they aren't the monopoly. I think the evidence you have before you is uniform support for something to be done.
Yeah. Thank you.
Everyone wants you to do something, but actually everyone wants you to do something that's going to work as well. So they're not just asking you for anything, they're asking you for something that matters.
And that will make a difference for disabled people.
Yeah. And if you want our help, you'll get it.
Thank you to both of you and to the organisation for the work you do for our community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
All right. Our next submitter is the New Zealand Disability Support Network. Now, I believe Mr. Reynolds is their Chief Executive Officer, and he is going to be appearing in person, I believe. But again, we have a few minutes before, unless Mr. Reynolds is in the room.
No, he's not in the room. We're just checking on whether he's outside.
Okay. Well, we'll just hold fire, everyone, for a minute.
Sorry, he's not available.
Okay. All right. Well, we will then break for 10 minutes until he is available. Is that the right time frame, Isabel?
Yes, that's right for the what's on the agenda.
Okay. Let's try and get back maybe in 9 minutes so that we're all ready to go. Thank you very much, everyone. And I do appreciate how well we're doing in terms of running to time. It's great to see.
mentioned about accessibility, suppose it's sort of keying with by car.
Kia ora koutou. Just give everyone a minute to get back into the room. Right, Mr. Reynolds. Welcome to the Social Services Subcommittee A. Thank you very much for giving us your time. My name's Emily Henderson. I'm the acting chair, and you have in your room, the room with you virtually, Tony Severin from ACT, Dan Rosewarren from Labour, Penny Simmons from National, and I'm also Labour. We're all sitting remotely because Monday is a constituency day for MPs, so we're all doing a bit of a juggling act because it is very important that we hear from as many people as possible on this bill. So you can take it as read that we have read your excellent submission. As an organisation, you've got 15 minutes. Feel free to use that as you will. But if at the end you could pause. Oh, and Jan Logie is in the room, of course. I'm sorry, Jan. Yeah, if you could pause a couple of minutes before the end so that we can ask questions. And also to introduce you to Donna, our interpreter for this session.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that warm welcome. And thank you for the opportunity to speak in regard to our submission on this bill. Look, I appreciate the task the Select Committee has in exploring what appears to be a rather unpopular bill. It's unpopular, I guess, in our view, because it fails to deliver a more accessible New Zealand for disabled people and others in our community. We support the principle behind the bill, improving accessibility, but we're not confident that this is the best way to achieve that. I'm not going to focus on all of the reasons why the bill doesn't seem to hit the mark, but rather on what could be done to make it good. Let's start with an outcome. And I guess my question is, how will this bill make life better for the 1 in 4 people throughout our population who experience a disability in one form or another? The outcome sought by the bill needs to be clearer and more explicit, not only to make it clear for disabled New Zealanders, but also our whole community. We all contribute to accessibility. Moving to structure, the bill, as we read it, sets out to establish one committee to set up another. There's an absence of any definition or scope of what accessibility entails as a concept. Are we talking about the width of door jambs, or are we embracing a more sophisticated view that includes many of the challenges faced by those with intellectual disabilities, neurological conditions, sensory challenges, and so on? The bill fails to define clearly what happens when an accessibility issue is discovered. Is it limited to a committee writing a letter to a minister? Or will someone somewhere have some teeth to be able to influence real change? The United Nations recently observed that not enough was being done in New Zealand to ensure a whole of government approach to accessibility and disability issues. Rather, we've had an Office for Disability Issues that has required every government department and ministry to write an annual report. I used to do that in a previous life with MSD. Why don't we explore the formation of a disability caucus? Why is every government department and ministry not required to have a disability advisory group? Some do, and it's very effective. Why is it if we put all of our business cards on the table, it would be incredibly rare to see one with Braille? Is considered normal to do so if you work in the disability sector, but not in any other setting. And it's about broadening out the scope of what disability is that will improve accessibility. The bill provides no set of standards or expectations around accessibility. Kainga Ora, for example, have a self-imposed KPI of 15% of social housing new builds being fully accessible. The Labour Party's own manifesto prior to the last election promised 25%. Yet we've got this difference. The United Nations called for 100%. Why not a fully accessible social housing home wherever Kainga Ora is building one on the flat, near shops, or on a public transport route? We wrote to Kainga Ora to ask how many new social houses have been built in the past 12 months. They told us 1,232 were acquired, new, or redeveloped and completed within the 21-22 year. We asked them to tell us how many of those were fully accessible, meeting the universal standards. They told us 266 homes, which is above the 15% target they've got. So that's what, nearly 22%. But they also told us that not all the universal standards were included. So it makes it really difficult to make a judgment on whether accessibility is being achieved according to their own KPI. And we asked Kainga Ora how many of the existing social housing units have been retrofitted to meet those standards. They told us they spent an average of $27,500 retrofitting existing homes over an undefined period, but they couldn't tell us how many houses. So the number itself seems quite small, but without knowing how many homes are involved, it makes it rather hard to see what's going on. Look, we know that it costs almost nothing to ensure a new build is fully accessible. And we also know that it costs over $15,000 to retrofit each and every existing home. So our concern, just when we're talking about housing, is how much taxpayers' money will be wasted before taxpayers, politicians, and the disabled community see some accountability here. And why is this so hard? We've been meeting with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development in an effort to progress these issues, and will continue to do so while we see a tempered and ineffective response to disability housing issues, accessibility issues, and unresponsiveness to the needs of the disabled community. The issue is particularly important to disability support providers because they're the ones providing the options to ensure disabled people lead a good life. Frequently, constrained by a lack of funding and scarce workers, partnering with government over the provision of appropriate and accessible housing and community facilities is high on our agenda as well. Finally, there doesn't appear to be any accountability in the bill. We believe that accountability is a good thing. Knowing that it's contributing to the desired outcome is essential, but knowing to government and to disabled people and the wider community that it works is critical. There are other recommendations we've made in our submission, and I commit to you the hope that it strikes a chord. I'm happy to respond to any questions you may have and wish you all well in your deliberations and for a very merry and accessible Christmas and New Year.
Well, thank you very much. That was a really helpful and thoughtful submission. And that's certainly something to be said of your written submission also. I'm looking around the room and I can't see Jan. So Jan, you're just going to need to just jump.
Elder, I will then, though I see Dan had his hand up before me, so.
Okay, well, let's on the basis that you are Her Majesty's loyal opposition, let's go with you first and we'll come to the government last. Yes?
Elder, thank you very much. A couple of questions, if I may. So one of them, and thank you for your submission, you make in your written submission the point about that actually it's a bit unclear how this differs from the disability strategy reporting.
Yes.
And I wonder if you just want to, because that's a concern I've been trying to get my head around. So if you could talk us through that a bit more, yeah, would be, I think, helpful.
Look, we've got an awful lot of bits of paper that are all purporting to do wonderful things for disabled people.
Yeah.
We have the disability strategy, we have human rights, we also have enabling good lives.
Yeah.
And we've got reports now from the United Nations on deinstitutionalisation and other observations. But we don't get the perception that there's any real leadership around how to pull these different things together. So we end up with competing interests, depending upon where officials may sit in terms of what's on their desk at the time. The disability strategy is an excellent document if we're able to put in place all of the things we would really like to put in place for disabled New Zealanders. And that means finding slightly more flexible ways than currently might be the case in some instances. Accessibility is a good issue. For example, if a disabled person who is living in an entirely unacceptable home environment but has access to a carer, wants to try and access a social house through Kainga Ora, they're at the bottom of the list. They're at the bottom of the list because they're not sleeping in a car, they're not sleeping under a blanket in the middle of the street. They've got a problem. And that's where we get some of these rules that just simply get in the way. So we may have a strategy like the disability strategy, but it's how we're seeking to interpret that and the flexibility and trust within the system that enables the people who are in a position to help out to do their job. We don't need providers for everything. We have Enabling Good Lives, which empowers disabled people to make choices and to empower them to control their own destiny. And I think that's important. But we all play a part, and it is a partnership.
And a second question, if I may, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, Jan, we only have a few minutes and we've actually got 2 questions waiting. Would you mind seeing whether we've got time after that?
Go for it.
Tony, you're on mute.
Yep. Thank you very much, Peter. You just raised that question about Kainga houses, because where I live here in Christchurch and the east side, we've got a whole lot of new builds that are just happening around my neighbourhood. And you're just saying that about accessibility housing, getting that sort of figures going. My question would be is, if they were building, would that add a lot more cost to their build to incorporate fully accessible homes? And also, because where I am, where they're replacing it because of quake and that, they're very close to shops and bus routes. Would that cost them a lot more to make them universal? So for like future proofing them for also people that need them for when they get older as well?
There's a couple of points that you've made there. I guess the first observation I would make is normally, no, it wouldn't cost anything extra. The most we've heard about making a house completely compliant with the universal standards is about $5,000. So, I mean, that's neither here nor there, really. I do know of some more expensive examples where councils have built what they call a fully accessible outcome, but because it was 2-storied, they found there were some problems. We'll go figure. So, sorry, the second part of your question was?
Oh, it was just, that was mainly what it was. And I noticed you've got the same sort of figures I do, is these 266 homes, but we don't know how many of them are fully accessible.
All right, we're going to, on that basis, Tony, we're going to move to Dan.
Thank you for your submission, Peter. I'm just having a look at your conclusion and overall recommendations, and you've compared, drawn a comparison to similar legislations from overseas, and you mentioned the Americans with Disabilities Act. And just looking at their website now, it looks like they have like a standalone ministry that links accessibility together throughout all across all the government departments. Yep. And this government does have some synergies with that, and their beliefs in the importance of a ministry to improve overall accessibility. But there is, I acknowledge, there some mixed views on having an overall ministry. What are your views in that space?
I think having an overall ministry for disabled people is essential. I think it's a great step. The problem arises when it's hamstrung. Now, we've been waiting since the 1st of July, having celebrated the opening of that ministry here in Parliament. to find out what budget they've got. We heard what was in the budget when it was announced back in May, June. Something like $700 million has been allocated to disability, but we have no idea whatsoever how that's being distributed. So we're really fearful at the moment that we've got what is an excellent ministry in place who's just got no money and resources to be able to do anything, but with a high level of expectation from the sector on what they're going to deliver. So we're trying to work very closely with Whaikaha. We're trying to pick up some activities, if you like, that we can do on behalf of Whaikaha because they're capacity poor at the moment as part of that transition. So really the plan hasn't quite come together, and that might be a timing issue, to be fair. So we need to play along with this until such time as we see that it is capable of delivering what the sector expects and what the community expects.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much. Jan, we'll bring it back to you. You had a second question.
Thank you. It's really to get a clear response from you in terms of we're hearing, particularly from DPOs, that in the United Nations, that the committee should go back to a co-design process to get something that will work and is consistent with the convention in terms of that engagement. Is that something that you believe should happen and would get the best result?
I think if I can draw on the example from my previous answer around Whaikaha's activities, they're starting off in the direction that I think is the answer to your question, and that is a greater level of collaboration and treating the different parties within the disability sector in a true partnership manner. No one part of our sector is going to have 100% of the answers needed to make something work. It requires everybody to sit around the table and have some free and frank discussions about, actually, is this the quality of service that should be delivered? Does it meet our expectations? Is this the best solution for accessibility that we need? Do we really want to shut down all our residential services? So if we're talking about enabling good lives as the paramount strategy for disabled people, making sure they are empowered, making sure they have choice, making sure that there is the opportunity there to lead not a good life, but a great life, then we need to make sure that everybody in that circle is talking and listening to one another. And I see some early examples of that coming from Whaikaha. I applaud it, and I give every encouragement to those officials to continue down that path.
Okay, I'm going to bring us to a close there because I have let what was a very interesting discussion keep going, but I am conscious that I'm eating into my members' time when they can go and do the other things they need to do. Thank you very much. We really do appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you again as we go about the process of building.
I can promise it.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. Wonderful. See you again. All right, guys, we are off until 1:20, and we'll see you back then. And as per usual, if everyone could come in a minute early, that would be great. So we're there for our person. Thank you.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Yes.
We do have a submitter in this gap.
Someone is actually here. All right. Well, I'm sorry. Everyone, stay where you are. It's not in the notes there. Who do we have?
We have Henrietta Bollinger appearing by Zoom.
Okay. Well, in that case, everyone, we will stay for Henrietta Bollinger, and it doesn't seem to be in my on my sheet, Isabel.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, that was a late addition.
That's all right. Okay, everyone. Thank you very much. We will keep going. Ms. Bollinger, lovely to have you with us.
Lovely to be here.
And nice. And if I can just introduce us all.
Yes.
My name is Emily Henderson, and I'm the chair today. And with us, we have Alan, who is our sign language interpreter. We have Tony Severin, who is an ACT List MP. We have Dan Rosewarren, and he's a Labour MP. And we also have Penny Simmons, and she's the National MP. And then we have, listening not on Zoom, but watching from the Select Committee room, we have Jan Logie from Greens. Now, Penny's camera is off, and that'll be because she's having difficulty with her Wi-Fi.
Sure.
So don't worry about that. Although, Isabel, would you mind just seeing whether you can contact Penny to make sure she isn't following the old timetable? All right. Well, Henrietta, you can take it that we have read your submission and you've got 10 minutes. Just use it as you will. But if you could pause near the end, see if there's any questions, that'd be really good. Thank you.
Absolutely. Kia ora koutou. As said, my name is Henrietta. My sign name is Etta. It's like a joystick control. So representative of the wheelchair that I get around in daily life, and was gifted to me. You'll know from reading my submission that I'm submitting against the bill as it is currently drafted, but I suppose in favour of the intent and the need for comprehensive accessibility legislation, but I don't feel that what we have in front of us is going to deliver on that, particularly having been part of some early discussions in my work with the Disabled Persons Assembly, where I'm now a member of the board. And I will take my recommendations as read, and I feel that they will have come to the committee by various other submissions from the community. What I really want to speak to is that I was born in 1993, so my life as a disabled person has always been one where my rights have been covered and upheld under the Human Rights Act. And it is difficult for me to imagine what life as a disabled person would have been like had I been born into a generation that wasn't being afforded those rights, and that wasn't explicitly covered in legislation, although in my work I do know some of the people who actively fought both for the inclusion of disabled people in the Human Rights Act, and then again in the development of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, both for what the shape of that would be, and also in encouraging New Zealand to ratify it. And I feel that if the Human Rights Act was the piece of legislation that made an sort of quietly made an impact for me growing up as a disabled person, I'm basically here to say that if this is going to be the equivalent offer that we make disabled young people born now, it will be nowhere near the kind of it will have nowhere near the impact that the Human Rights Act has had on my generation, and it will ultimately be purely symbolic and not create the kind of transformative change that it is being that it should represent, and that I believe it appears to represent to some people outside of the disability community who are seeing this as we are making change for disabled people, but disabled people are not experiencing that as substantive. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Well, thank you very much. You know, it's a really interesting submission, and it's not a question, but can I just say it's really good to have someone younger in the room, and I hope that you continue to submit often and frequently on all matters. I guess one thing I would start with now, I can't see the room, but I am aware that we also have Maureen Pugh in the room, which I wasn't aware of until just recently. So Maureen's another Nat MP. Jan or Maureen, do either of you have a question?
Yep.
Yes, Jan does.
I do. Kia ora, Henrietta. Thank you for your submission. I'm just wondering, in terms of, because you've had quite a lot of experience around advocating for change through DPA across government agencies, whether you've got any concern, part of your concern with this bill, do you share my concern that this might be creating a bottleneck that slows down progress rather than speeding it up, because agencies will get to say, oh, that committee will look at it?
Yes, I know that there is a concern of the Disabled Persons Assembly more broadly, and it is one that I share. The best solutions are going to be cross agency, and I think we need something that cross agency and cross sector, and we need something that articulates the collective responsibility for accessibility and also the collective value. I don't think, I think that the draft bill has correctly identified that what we have right now is a piecemeal system, and that something else is needed. But it also, the focus on barrier identification, I think, is just going to mean that the disabled people and their organisations are going to be telling the same stories to government that have already been told. And I think, we're doing both the disabled community and government a disservice to say that, those stories haven't been heard, and that there isn't already enough evidence to start working on barrier reduction rather than just barrier identification. Of course, we need systems for the kind of cohesive, to ensure that there's cohesive change. But yeah, I agree. It will just, it does have that danger of putting pressure in one area and not distributing the responsibility for accessibility.
Okay, I have a very quick question, and then we will go for our break, members. Henrietta, this legislation in a way is part of setting up the infrastructure for the new ministry, of course, and I'm aware that there are some parties in government who believe that the ministry itself shouldn't continue. Do you feel that whatever its shortcomings, this enterprise that we're on is still a worthwhile one?
I believe
the ministry itself, I mean.
The ministry, the ministry, I believe is, it does, I guess, articulate a commitment from government towards change. There are concerns, I suppose, about, there have been concerns from the community. Early on, there were concerns, of course, about leadership and ensuring that it was disability-led, and there are now concerns around capacity, and also ensuring that if it's the agency responsible for service delivery to disabled people, that there are still mechanisms for disabled people to be able to affect change, because
listen,
dependent system, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Listen, thank you very much. We've gone a wee bit over because that was really interesting. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again.
Thanks,
and good luck with your work.
Thank you.
Members, we're now going to break for 10 minutes. Tony, are you aware we're on a break for 10 minutes?
Madam Chair, you're on mute.
Goodness me. Welcome back, everyone. Do we have our next person in the room and ready?
Yes, we do, Madam Chair.
Excellent. Well, let us move there. I'm currently looking at Maureen and Jan, so I can't actually see, but I'm imagining it is Julie Woods.
Yes, they're appearing by Zoom.
Ah, excellent. That would explain that. Okay. Well, Ms. Woods, wonderful to have you with us. Thank you very much for coming on, and welcome also to your support person, Dan. If I can just briefly introduce all of us, Ko Emily Henderson aho, I'm your acting chairperson today. And in the room with us, we have Tony Severin from ACT, we have Penny Simmons from National, we have Dan Rosewarren, who like me is from Labour. And then actually in the select committee room in Wellington is Jan Logie from the Greens and Maureen Pugh from National. We also have today, Donna is your sign language interpreter. You can take it as read that we've read your submission. This is your 10 minutes to use in any way you like. But if you could leave a couple of minutes at the end for us to ask any questions, then that would be great. But take it away.
Kia ora. Thank you. Can you hear me, Millie?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Can you see me?
I can't see you, I'm afraid.
No, I've tried to do Alt-V to turn the video on, but it doesn't seem to want to do that.
Technology is wonderful until it isn't, but we can hear you, and that's the main point.
Excellent. Well, it's an equal playing field then, isn't it? Because I'm not able to see you.
Exactly.
So thank you very much. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Greetings to you all. Thank you. My name is Julie Woods. I'm that blind woman from Otipoti, Dunedin, and I am totally blind. And thank you for allowing me to speak to my submission today. And really, I wanted to do that, and I wanted to make a submission to the Accessibility for New Zealanders bill, because as an ordinary blind person, it's very difficult to understand what impact any legislation may have on my everyday life, as well as the everyday lives of my 15,000 blind brothers and sisters. I wrote 5 questions in my submissions, which I'd like to speak to now. The first one was around access to pharmaceutical information. And my question was, will this bill, if passed into legislation, mean that I will be able to receive accessible medication information with regard to Braille labelling on any medication that I receive, or having information about my medication in an accessible format? And for blind people, that is either audio, electronic, Braille or large print. I received a bag full of pharmaceuticals from my chemist last week, and in it there were 2 tubes of cream, one for my face and one for my vagina. I'm still not sure which one goes where.
Sorry.
I'm sure you can relate to that, some of you.
I think that just became the moment of the day, Julie. Thank you.
Secondly, I receive my appointment times from eye professionals in print. For 25 years that I've been blind, I have received my appointment times through the post and in a format that I'm not able to access. In fact, last year, 2 weeks before cataract surgery and at a pre-op appointment, my ophthalmologist handed to me my pre-op instructions in print.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And these are the things that we have to experience as blind people, and me particular as a blind person. The third one was around voting and the inaccessibility of voting in the general and local body elections. I'm not able to vote independently. When it comes time to the national elections, I have to take my husband into the polling booth. Now, I've been married to 2 husbands, and both their politics were both terrible, and I have had to trust that they would tick the box that I wanted them to tick on my ballot paper. And I would dearly love to be independent when making my vote. A woman died to get the vote, and I take my responsibility as a voting citizen very seriously, and I really want to be able to do this independently. The 4th thing I raised was around retail access to information. When I purchase something from a retail outlet, I don't get to take away the nice information booklet in an accessible format. I recently purchased a smartwatch and it came with a print booklet, but when my watch stopped talking to me, I wasn't able to access those instructions. Lastly, was around websites and how will this mean that we as blind people will no longer have to put up with inaccessible websites. I completed an online enrolment form recently, and one of the fields just said field, and it didn't tell me what I was to put into that field. As you can imagine, this makes it inaccessible and very frustrating for a blind person who is living in a technological world, and technology is so important to us. According to the United Nations, the definition of disabled people is those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which interaction with various barriers may hinder their full or effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. We are individuals with impairments, and society disables us. I am a blind person with a vision impairment, and I am disabled by print. Take away the print and you take away the disability. I hope that in raising these points with you as part of this submission process, that I've raised awareness of some of the things that as a blind person I face, or the barriers that I face as a blind person in accessing what I need. And I hope that this legislation will have enforcements and standards that people can adhere to, businesses and government can adhere to, so that we can have an accessible New Zealander, that we can have an accessible New Zealand for us all to live in.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions around the table? No? Oh, yes, we do. We have Penny Simmons. Penny.
Thank you, Emily. Julie, thank you very much. And can I just pass on to you that you were a great inspiration to my legally blind sister with your cooking shows. So thank you for that.
Sure, Penny.
Julie, could you tell us what country you think does this best for people with vision impairment or people who are blind? Who does it best that we could look at?
Well, probably America have had the ADA, the Americans Disability Act, since 1990. They do it well. Canada have passed legislation, and of course the UK recently, Penny, when I was watching the Commonwealth Games, I was struck by the sentiment or the instructions that was given to the crowd that said, please stand if you are able. And I mean, the UK are all over this stuff as well. I think those three would be a good place to start.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you again for the cooking show.
Oh, my pleasure, Penny.
Well, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for your years of advocacy and your eloquent submission, not to mention the moment of humour.
Thank you, Millie. Thank you very much.
I think we only have a couple of men on this particular session, and I'm sure it was illuminating for them.
Has this Dan got anything he'd like to add?
Nothing more from me, Julie. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very
much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the work that you do.
Okay, our next submitter is Megan Wells, who is coming by Zoom, I think. Megan, welcome to the committee. I don't know whether you've been able to listen in to previous submitters, so I'll just do my quick roundup. Can you hear me? Excellent. I'm Emily, ko Emily Henderson Aho. I'm the acting chair for the subcommittee. With us in the room in Wellington is Jan Logie from Greens and Maureen Pugh from National. Joining us virtually from their constituencies, because this is normally a constituency day for all of us MPs. We have Dan Rosewarren from Labour, we have Tony Severin from ACT, we have Penny Simmons from National, and me, also a Labour MP. And your interpreter today in sign language is Alan. And you have your 10 minutes. You can take it as read that we have read your submission. So use this time as you wish. But if you could pause a couple of minutes from the end just to see if there's any questions, that would be great.
Sure thing. I really want to start with a question that I know you can't answer, but I want you to think about. And that is, what does this bill mean by accessibility? From what I've read, there is not a clear defined framework of substance. There are no responsibilities or accountability written into the framework. There is no authority to act for the panel that has been mentioned in the bill so far, which means that there's no power for change. There's no consequences if people breach things, because at the moment there's nothing to breach. The bill misses who to report to, what powers they have to do anything about what you report, and what happens if it's breached. It fails to mention who is responsible for what. The councils, they need to be responsible for ramps that are too steep on the building consents that they approve. The curb cutout placements that are entirely either wrong or not there for the mobility parks and accessibility around town. The car parks that don't suit every need for disability. They might suit if you're a passenger, but they don't suit if you're seated anywhere else in the car, or if you're a rear loading vehicle. They're not long enough. The doorways in the buildings that gain consent and claim to be accessible to people, but you might fit your wheelchair through the door, but not if you've got to use your hands to push yourself. The toilets where the change tables are only for babies, but there are no change tables for anybody older or heavier that needs help. So anybody who's paralysed or has issues with toileting, you have to go home if you soil your pants, which means that town's not accessible. You can't go anywhere, you can't have a life unless you're at home. My main points that I wanted to cover that were not already in my written submission are around healthcare and access to healthcare. Now, I could go on for hours about my own journey and how disastrous that has been with Hawke's Bay DHB. For starters, I can only discuss areas that affect me. There are not enough permitted parks at Hawke's Bay DHB for the number of people who need to use them. Parking in general is an issue. the placement of the parks, there's a raised section, almost like a hill. If you're having to push yourself in the chair, it's quite a struggle to get to the main entrance of the hospital. And it's a drive-up ramp for drop-off and pick-up. It's steep. It's very difficult to navigate. If you are having to push yourself because you're on your own, or you're a little old lady trying to push your husband, or a little old man trying to push your wife up that ramp, it's quite a struggle. And there's nobody about to give you any help. The parks that are nearest to the clinics, you can access the clinics fine from there. But if you're parking there because you need access to the main hospital for anything, you've got to get up this big ramp. If you park on the other side in the main car park, you've still got to get through some buildings and up a big ramp to get in the main door. Now, this causes many issues at the moment because due to the changes that COVID's making in the entry of the hospital, you used to be able to enter through ED, and there was another door to the side so that you didn't have to go in ED, so that you could access radiology or the fracture clinic. Now, they don't let patients in there unless you're going to ED now. Now you've got to go in through the main doors at the furthest exit point away from those clinics. Now, the majority of disabled people with disabilities that require either wheelchair or mobility aids or a struggle to walk are accessing radiology or the fracture clinic. So why is that situated the furthest away from the door? Because they won't allow access at the close door. So these things relate to the access, and there's nobody to be held accountable for this. You try and speak to anybody at the DHB and their answer is, it's what we've been told we have to do because of COVID. And I do understand that COVID creates some restrictions, but it is making the hospital inaccessible to people. City Medical is, when Napier Hospital closed, was promised that it would help relieve the burden from Hastings ED. There is a lack of parks anyway, definitely a lack of mobility parks. If you have to park in the main car park to access this, the curb there, it has quite a lip on it. It's quite difficult. So that makes trying to enter the building challenging. The cost is so extreme. I think your average, your lowest cost to access a doctor at City Medical is about $50. That jumps up if it's after hours or weekends, public holidays, and can be anywhere in the range of $120 to see a doctor. Many people are forced to do this because you can't get access to your own GP for 2 or 3 weeks. And if things are urgent, you have to go there. Their hours where there is actually a doctor on site is limited because after hours, they have to call a doctor in if you're deemed urgent enough. A majority of the time, it is just GPs manning this, which means if it's outside a scope of a GP, you get sent to ED anyway. So it is overwhelming ED, despite the fact that the purpose was to help relieve pressure. There's a lack of emergency care experience at City Medical, which means that things like, surely if you arrive at City Medical, which is supposed to be relieving pressure from the DHB, and you've broken your leg, considering there is an x-ray machine there which does work 7 days a week but is only between limited hours. So if you arrive there outside hours, you can't get your x-ray or be seen, you've got to go to ED anyway. That could be dealt with better.
Megan, can I just ask you do you want to see whether there's questions, or would you rather use your full time? It's entirely up to you, no judgment either way.
I have just a little bit more to
Sure.
go and then I'll ask questions. Sorry, I have a plane going overhead at the moment. Okay, so my last bunch of points is the medical centres themselves. My personal medical centre and many others in my town have very small car parks. You're lucky if you can maybe get 20 cars in the car park, and often they're taken up by staff. There might be 1 or 2 mobility parks, and with an ageing population and a population where there are more and more disability issues coming about, that's not enough. The doorways, my doctor himself has to come and get me from the waiting room and wheel me through the door because I can't use my hands on the side to wheel myself through the door. The doorways are too narrow. And then once he gets me in, he has to climb over me to get back to his desk so that we can have a conversation because the rooms are small. We have issues getting appointments in the first place. The availability of this could be 3 weeks away. We have issues with communication with the staff because the COVID regulations are still in place, so the perspex is there and everybody's wearing a mask, so everything's muffled, and often the staff quite loudly have to ask you to repeat everything you say because they can't hear you. Now, I can only imagine how frustrating that would be if you were already slightly or fully deaf. But it does mean that there is a complete lack of privacy when speaking to somebody at the medical centre because you have to do it at volume in front of a crowd of people.
Yes, and which would be extremely embarrassing.
Yes,
absolutely understand that. Listen, yes. Megan, it's been a very eloquent submission, and we are very grateful for your time. We are actually now slightly over time, so I'm really sorry we haven't had time for questions. But thank you for the time and for the thoughtfulness of your submission and for bringing your real experience into the room as well. It's really valuable to us.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will now, panel, move on to the Muscular Dystrophy Association Central Region. And I believe that they have members who are attending in person and by Zoom. Hello, are you Mr. Stein?
Yes.
Kia ora. My name, and I see we have Alison Riseborough in the room also. Welcome to the Subcommittee A of the Social Services Select Committee. My name's Emily Henderson and I'm the acting chair. Most of us are appearing by Zoom today because Monday is normally a constituency day. So in the room we have Donna, who is the sign language interpreter. We have Penny Simmons from National, Tony Severin from ACT, Dan Rosewarren from Labour, and me also from Labour. Yeah, you can take it for granted that we have read your excellent submission. Thank you very much. You've got 15 minutes. All I'd ask is that if you wanted to take some questions or leave room for discussion, you paused a couple of minutes near the end. We also have Lydia Wilson. Lydia, are you part of this submission group, or so that I know to include you if you'd like to put your hand up? Now, when I say, you know, I don't know what your, I'll leave you guys to organize how you're going to divide your submission.
Okay, I'll outline that. Can I begin?
Of course.
Okay. First, Tēnā koutou katoa. We have 3 speakers today, and we'll keep it each talk relatively brief, so we stay within our time frame. We represent the Central Region, which is really a very large region of the Muscular Dystrophy Association of New Zealand, which I'll abbreviate as MDA. Our organization is entirely member-led. We're non-for-profit, and we represent people who have over 70 neuromuscular conditions. Our particular region has over 650 members, so we represent a lot of people. Our members are of all ages and backgrounds. People are probably familiar with some of the neuromuscular diseases that we represent, that are represented by our members, particularly muscular dystrophy, spinal muscular atrophy, which has been in the news quite a bit, metabolic muscle diseases, hereditary neuropathies, and among others. These diseases often, and not surprisingly, result in severe disability due to muscle wasting and loss of central nervous control. The symptoms are weakness, loss of mobility, and some of these conditions, unfortunately, result in the early loss of life. Many of our members become wheelchair users, and some become fully dependent, often as children. Today we have 3 speakers, and I'll introduce each one and then I'll let them speak. The first speaker is Lydia Wilson. Lydia is a member of our executive committee, which is all voluntary. She's needed to use a wheelchair for the past. She's needed to use a wheelchair for the last 8 years.
You sure?
Yeah. Hello, is it me? I'm Lydia Wilson, and as a member of the Muscular Dystrophy Association, I represent some of the other people with access needs in our group. When I lived in New Plymouth about 3 years ago, I had a group of friends and I used to visit a different house every week, and all of the houses were difficult for me to get into in a wheelchair. In fact, one family had to buy stainless steel ramps to get me up the stairs into their house, and none of those places I visited had an accessible bathroom I could use with a rail on the wall. Another issue that I have faced is the intercity buses do not provide for power chairs to go online onto the buses. You have to be able to climb the stairs, which I did once, but I couldn't do it anymore because my disability is like that. I'll now hand over to Alison Riseborough.
And also, I'd just like to introduce who Alison is. Alison Riseborough is also a member of our executive committee. Alison has been in a wheelchair for 40 years, and she'll speak specifically to our concerns about the current bill.
Alison Riseborough speaking. Lydia's outlined some particular issues that she experiences. In our written submission, we included quite a lot of examples, but we're not going to go over all of those. So I think the key point we wanted to make, two points. The first one is that we support the intent of the bill. Which is to make New Zealand accessible so that all disabled people can live independently and fully participate in all aspects of life. That's very important to us. The right to accessibility, as you probably have heard by now, is outlined in Article 9 of the UNCRPD. So it's been 15 years since the New Zealand ratified that convention, and our members have only been slow, limited, and very hard won improvements to access since that time. It's taking forever to get any real change. So we do believe that New Zealand needs urgent legislation. And I guess our view is that the legislation needs to explicitly affirm accessibility as a basic human right. And we're also of the view that it needs to make provision for the creation, monitoring, and enforcement of minimum standards. And neither of those things are in the bill, and we think those are both very important. We've had collectively with the rest of the disability community many years of campaigning to get changes, and until there are acts and legislations, very little gets done. Voluntary work, voluntary provision, discretionary provision, they don't go far enough, and it leaves us in a position of each individually or collectively having to advocate with service providers. So yeah, we're disappointed in the bill. We don't think that creating an accessibility committee will be enough to generate the change we need. And many others will probably comment. The committee only has an advisory role, and there's no expectation that its advice will be acted on. And also when you read the methodology that the committee expected to follow, it doesn't include any sense that they're going to look at the human rights implication of each issue, which we think is a serious omission. And we're also concerned that there are no time frames for achieving change. No way to drive change over a period of time so it doesn't drag out forever. And I guess our other concern is we told you about all of some of the issues we have. There are a large number of accessibility issues. A lot of them are very complex, and we're just not convinced that funneling them through one small committee actually won't slow down progress by creating a bottleneck. So overall, in support of trying to accelerate accessibility, disappointed in the bill as it currently stands. Thank you. I'll hand back over to Richard.
Okay. Well, I would just like to summarize what Alison said so well. What the membership of the MDA wants and needs is a true accessibility bill. Something that allows people to enjoy a full life, something most of us take for granted. It's been 15 years since New Zealand ratified the UN Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities. And since that time, we really have very, very little to show for it. The current bill, we do not feel will affect any substantial change in the foreseeable future. And unfortunately, most of our members don't have the luxury of time. So we would like to see Parliament use this opportunity to put forward a bill that really creates a legacy and shows the world that New Zealand values its disabled community. New Zealand really should be setting the bar for the rest of the world, not lagging behind. We would like to see a bill that does the following. First and foremost, to affirm that accessibility to all aspects of life is a basic human right and applies to all disabilities, not just people in wheelchairs, but people that are disabled due to vision, hearing restrictions. We would like to see establishment of a disability-led committee, independent agency that establishes minimum well-defined standards and guidelines for accessibility. Current building codes, as they stand now, are vague, they're open to interpretation, they're poorly understood, and they're full of loopholes. We'd like to see development of a framework for establishing these frameworks and how they're going to be met, and plan for effective enforcement of those standards. And there should be substantial penalties for people that don't adhere to them.
Okay.
And we
Richard,
think that
I'm really sorry. I'm very sorry. We've actually gone a little over time now.
I only have less than 30 seconds.
Go for it.
Okay, and we'd like to provide advocacy support to people who are disabled that might not have the financial needs to advocate for themselves when their disability or accessibility rights are not being met. So with that, I'd like to thank the committee very much for the opportunity to submit this oral submission. Thank you.
Very grateful to all three of you for your time and the effort that it's taken to put together a really useful and helpful submission. Thank you very much. Sorry to have to move on. Team, we now have, I think, our final submitter, who is Trish Harris, who I believe is going to come with us, come to us in person in Wellington. Ms. Harris, welcome. And I'm sorry that we are not with you in person. As I've explained to several submitters today, Monday is normally a constituency day. So those of us who have our constituencies are balancing our commitments. So I'm sorry that we're doing this by Zoom, but thank you for making the effort to come in. Just to introduce you briefly, I'm Emily Henderson, I'm the acting chair. With us, we have Dan Rosewarren from Labour, we have Tony Severin from ACT, Penny Simmons from National, and in the room with you, you have Jan Logie from the Greens and Maureen Pugh from National. You've got your 15 minutes, sorry, your 10 minutes to use as you wish. And you can take it from me that we have read your submission. So use it as you wish. If you wish to leave a couple of minutes at the end for questions, that would be great.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Kia ora koutou. I'm also here with my friend, Sally Champion, who's behind, and so she might add in things at the end.
In that case, do you want to bring Sally up to sit beside you, because we won't be able to hear her unless she's with you?
Okay, are you happy to do that, Sally? Yeah. So what I've written something because I'm much better with notes, and I timed it just before, probably take about 5.5 minutes, so happy to have questions after that. So thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I said yes to speaking to my submission because I want us, disabled people, people with impairments, whether they're physical, sensory, intellectual, neuro, through illness, from birth, through accidents, through aging. I want all of us to be visible. Actually, I want us to be in your face as you take a good look at this bill. I want to be in your face because that is what an inaccessible environment does to us. It's right there. We can't get away from it. Even getting into this building today illustrated that. So I have a brief story to tell. One day, about 5 years ago, I visited a friend of mine. My friend is 90. She contracted polio when she was 4. When I arrived at her place, she greeted me with a wry comment. She had just read an article in the paper about a group of young disabled people who were fired up about improving access. She said that's what she was doing decades ago, going around public buildings, checking access, making reports, making recommendations. I was visiting her because we had some work to do together. We were both meeting to proofread a book called Creating Welcoming Churches, a book about making church and faith communities accessible to disabled people. It's a resource put together by a group we're both part of, and we were about to produce a second edition. Anyone who's done any proofreading knows it's a very tedious process. So we set about slowly reading through the contents of the book, sections on the rationale for accessibility, examples of good accessibility, and a checklist for making faith communities audio environment, their audio environment, their visual environment, their physical environment, and their social environment accessible to all. As my friend and I chatted afterwards, I discovered that despite resources like this, her church still has a rattly old ramp that she has to negotiate every Sunday. And that when a friend of hers dies, she has to ring up the church where the funeral is held to check the access to see if she can attend that funeral or not. My friend has had 86 years of inaccessibility. We finished the proofreading and then I headed into Wellington. That afternoon, I was going to a panel discussion for Disability Pride Week. The panel had a great lineup of disabled writers, activists, and people from NGOs. At one point, someone in the audience asked about progress, what progress was actually being made for disabled people, progress on income equality, employment, and access. One of the panelists said things were improving bit by bit. This group was talking to that group, recommendations were being made right, left, and centre. Because of the morning I'd had, where I too was involved in that painstaking process of change, and because of my friends' comments, and of course because of my own lived experience over the decades, by the time I heard progress was being made, even if it was slow, I wanted to yell out to the panelists and audience, what we need is a revolution. We don't need another committee or step-by-step approach, we need a revolt. I'm a writer, and there are certain strands of popular stories about disability that are all about triumph over the odds, an inspiring disabled person making it regardless of obstacles. But you know, those are sometimes cheap storylines because they do not acknowledge that people would not have to overcome nearly as much if the world, our world, was accessible. I read out a draft picture book that I've been writing to a class of 9 and 10-year-olds the other week. The story is set in a school where an aspect of the school is inaccessible. The teacher who was present when I read out the story was adamant my story must be set in the past because schools are totally accessible now. So often that is the outsider's view. Access is far better now, everything or nearly everything is all right. And if it isn't, all you have to do is make a polite request and it will be fixed. If only. It takes a friend going out with me for 5 minutes to realise inaccessibility is still in our faces. So this is your chance to stand up for accessibility, for a future where the onus is not on the disabled person to create an accessible environment, but where the legislation has teeth. I urge you to listen to the hard mahi disabled people's organisations have put in to saying how that can be done. And just hearing the end of Alison, who I know's submission, you know, like there's so much great detail there. And I just really urge you to bring that to the fore when you look at this bill and see all its inadequacies and make sure my friend, when she turns 100, is still not living in an inaccessible world. Thank you. I can't hear you.
Speaking of accessibility, apologies. We've got a question from Penny Simmons from National.
Thank you so much for your stories because it does bring it much closer to home for us. It's almost overwhelming, the changes that have to occur. And I keep thinking about it in my own context of a sister who was blind, a sister in a wheelchair, and our daughter who was Down syndrome. And I look across all the different accessibility issues for each one of those in a different, in their own situations. Can you help us to prioritise? What do you think are the key things that we have to try and fix immediately so we don't get overwhelmed and do nothing? Can you, and I'm sorry to put this on you, but can you briefly give us some sense of prioritisation?
Sally, I'd be happy if you jumped in as well, because it is an enormous question. I know when Sally and I were coming up, Sally mentioned timelines. Like you don't have to do everything at once. You can't do everything at once, but you can put everything on a timeline, can't you? You can actually put dates and tasks on that. I don't know, what would I put first? I don't know. I can't answer that on the spot, actually.
It's so individualistic, like what's important for us. Like I had polio when I was a child too. And I look for seats on the street that I can orientate myself to get along. I think I use it, go here and then I'll sit down. And so for each person, it is an individual thing for them. But there are also so many other people who need that same thing. So it would be sort of certainly counterintuitive to say, well, mobility is the most important, because that takes out sensory needs, sensory requirements. So I wouldn't be able to, as a disabled person, I wouldn't feel able to answer that question.
I think it shouldn't be one impairment pitted against the other.
No.
Like within the impairment groups, maybe those groups can look at priorities for them, but it would be a big mistake, I think, to pit one impairment against the other in terms of priority.
NGOs, like all the groups for the blind, groups for the deaf, groups for the DPA, for physically disabled, they would be able to feed into a process that could say this is a priority for our group. And then, as Alison says, it needs to be put on a timeline with what needs to be done, when it needs to be done by, who it will be monitored by, and what will be the consequences of not doing it. In my view.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to just interrupt because we are running out of time, but we have a question from Jan. Also, Maureen would like to know if you would be interested in giving some thought to putting the answers to the committee in writing. So we'll go to Jan briefly, and then I think we're going to have to wrap up our session.
Oh, thank you for your submission. I'll give it a go at being brief and put aside all of the
I have faith,
questions.
Jan.
Yeah. So I'm just, because you've said that you supported the submissions around from other of the DPOs, and that's what part of what's come through for me through that is following the recommendation of the United Nations for there to be a code design process with disabled people to come up with a solution that would enable the revolution that you're talking about. Is that part of what you're supporting?
Yeah, and Alison talked about that, didn't she, too, that needs to underpin it. Yeah.
And she's right about that idea of the committee, like as it stands, the committee that everything goes through. I mean, that would be I don't think that would be a good mechanism in my view. I mean, there would need to be, I just see that holding up time again for years, and then it'll be a political priority and it won't be, it's got to go across all governments.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you for what has been a really interesting submission, and not just the personal stories, but actually the reflection on things like the difficulty in prioritisation and the very individualised nature of disability, and also just the long-term trajectory that is activism and achieving change, is a useful reminder to us. I'm sorry we weren't able to be in person, but I do thank you very much for taking the time and for your submission today.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Hope to see you again. I think we have many discussions as we continue to work through the legislation that'll come out of this interesting ministry.
Hopefully it's a good piece of legislation. Thanks.
We're doing our best.
Yeah.
Well, committee, thank you all, and thank you to those who've been watching for your work. We're going to now move into private to close up, I believe. Madam Clerk?
Yes, that's correct, members.
Okay, I'll see you there in a minute, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.